It's been so shitty.
Okay, we are live, so I'll just ask our folks that are in the room to take seats. And welcome everybody to our Washington State University Board of Regents. We are in the Tri-Cities on our Tri-Cities campus in our beautiful brand new building here. So Collaboration Hall, what a fantastic name for it. So I wish everybody that is watching us virtually here could join us and see what a beautiful, amazing building that we have here on campus. So I am going to actually turn our meeting over for our committee of the whole around strategic and operational excellence with our chair, Regent Shetler.
Thank you, Regent Dickinson. Really appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. I am John Shetler, and I am the chair of the Strategic and Operational Committee meeting. I'd like to announce that we are live on YouTube. This morning, the Strategic and Operational Excellence Committee will focus on research today. Vice President of Research, Chris King, will start us off with a brief overview of the progress we have seen with research expenditures system-wide. Great news there. Since we are in the Tri-Cities, Tony Perron, Deputy Director of Science and Technology, will then talk about the partnerships we have with Pacific Northwest Laboratory, including focusing on 3 joint energy institutes, nuclear, grid, and bioproducts, and the Bioproducts Science Engineering Laboratory located on the Tri-Cities campus. Sandra Haynes, Chancellor of WSU Tri-Cities, will then introduce specific research efforts and the researchers on the Tri-City campus. They are small but very mighty when it comes to research and are turning their focus to growing the research agenda to focus on energy, the environment, and agriculture, as these are the key industries in the Mid-Columbia region. So now I'll turn it over to Sandra.
I think we're going to start with Chris Keene, who'll give the overview for the system research. So Chris.
Great. Okay. Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you again. So as Sandra said,
Chris, I think either maybe remove the mask
Oh,
or
we can?
speak a little louder if you can.
yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's a great mask part. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Great. Good morning, everyone. Great to see you. I'm just going to provide a quick overview on some of our research statistics here as a prelude to further discussion here of a really exciting program and growing program of research here in Tri-Cities, including our collaboration with I'm also really glad that Tony's been able to join us today. Thank you, Tony, for coming over. Tony is the Deputy Director of P&L and is my counterpart director overseeing that collaboration. So I think you'll have a very interesting one. So first, just big picture, where do we stand on research at WSU? I think you're all aware, our annual budget across all 6 campuses is about $1 billion plus, and our research expenditures are a little less than a third of that, about 350 million or so. We just figured out our FY21 number for research expenditures, which is, again, how much we spent. Okay, it includes all different categories. And it was up nicely from the previous year. It's now about 357 million versus 330 in 2020. Credit to a lot of people, faculty, staff, students, people here in this room, lots of folks. So thank you all for that. It's about 7% increase, which is nice. It's a bit bigger than we've seen in the past, so we're going in the right direction. Just a few more stats, which I have to present because I'm the VPR, right? But I'm going to do some campus specific comments in a minute. Also, another statistic that's very, very exciting for us in terms of portending good expenditures is our award numbers. From FY 20 to 21, we actually increased awards excluding stimulus by about $35 million. In FY 22 year to date, which is right now, we're actually about $43 million ahead of the pace in FY 21. So if that all works out, between FY 20 and 22, we will have basically received about $70 million more in federal awards. Again, a lot of people get credit for that. I want to thank the faculty, staff, Colleen's group is of course key there too as well, federal relations, state. So big team effort to make this happen, right? So the numbers are looking good. I think just thinking about, what's happening at our various campuses, I just summarize it sort of in the following way. I've spent it, at this meeting, we've talked a lot about research expertise in various areas of Pullman and Spokane in particular, generally, right? Spokane is about 15% of our total. Our Pullman research enterprise continues to grow in a whole host of areas, science, engineering, and also arts and humanities. Some very exciting work there. Things like our Institute for the Arts and Humanities, which I would hope actually you might want to see some discussion of that in the future from Todd Butler or others in our arts and science. So just a great multidisciplinary spectrum at our campuses. But very exciting things are happening also here in the Tri-Cities in Vancouver. We don't quite talk about that as much. I mean, you'll obviously hear more about Tri-Cities today, but just it's on the slide up there. But you can see that figure, $15 million in awards for Tri-Cities is a record high. Okay, and that represents the increasing activity there and things like bioproducts and other areas like Sandra will talk about. I think the other exciting thing to remember is even though Vancouver and Tri-Cities aren't the biggest numbers here on the screen, that can be looked at in two ways. Just the numbers there, but also the fact that it portends well for growth. There is a lot of growth opportunities in these campuses. Vancouver, for example, exceeded $1 million in EE funding to electrical engineering funding for the first time. So there are exciting things happening in Vancouver. I'd just like to point out there, 2 NSF career awards have recently been awarded, both to women, one from an underrepresented minority, which is very exciting to see that diversity of award and also gender and racial diversity there. Vancouver's research areas, research strengths include a number of things, but one of particular interest to all of us is climate. Professor D.P. Singh there has been very involved in climate research, including its effects on underprivileged communities. So that's really been exciting work. And of course, the life science building that we're going to be discussing at this meeting today will open up a lot more opportunity at Vancouver. And of course, Tri-Cities, we're going to hear more, but of course, a key part of Tri-Cities, again, is the P&L collaboration. We're right next to the lab. Actually, I was very fortunate to be at a P&L board meeting yesterday with Tony, and the lab is doing outstandingly well as well. And so really we're growing together. So it's really an exciting time for research writ large in the Tri-Cities and commercialization and economic development, which I won't get into here, but that is a big topic as well. So anyway, I think I'll just stop there, Sandra, and say, just say it's an exciting time for research at WSU and an exciting time here at Tri-Cities and all our campuses.
Thank you, Chris.
Any questions?
Yeah, any questions? Yeah.
I have one.
Sure.
What are the blockers to accelerating the growth here and in Vancouver?
That's an interesting question. I think so. We talk about this a lot, but generally speaking, because things have been growing, we're straining at a lot of the administrative support pieces that do research within the Office of Research, just processing and submitting. Within Vice President Stacey Pearson's office on account setup, all those problems have been largely dealt with. Actually, with an intensive effort by Stacey and her team the last few months. I think we're straining against our infrastructure generally in Vancouver. I think the life sciences building will really help that, right? I think also, of course, this is largely driven by the faculty. So as we move forward and start to recover financially, we can start to hire faculty or at least hire more faculty. I think you remember Regent Redmond, our statistics on expenditures per tenure track faculty number. It's 350 million divided by 900 odd faculty equals 360 odd million, which is just about, it is at the top of our aspirational peer set. So, per faculty member, we're performing outstandingly, right? So obviously one key is grow the faculty, which I think as we recover financially, we'll be able to do that. So it's a lot of things. It's infrastructure, it's support, it's growing the faculty and staff.
If
I could, Regent Redmond, one of the things that I asked Sandra to do today with the various groups on Tri-Cities is address this very issue. Wonderful to do these things here. Why are what we're doing here being successful? And secondly, what is curtailing our ability to do more growth-wise? And I think that's going to be part of a little bit of a panel discussion. So we'll hear from some of the people, frontline researchers, and exactly what they feel limitations are. Because we want to work on areas, you know, the blockers, as you put it, is a really great point. So I hope at the end of this session, we've answered that well.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So next up, we have Tony Farang, and thank you so much for spending your morning with us. We appreciate it. We know you're under a tight time limit here. But we have a very strong partnership with BNNL, actually several different kinds of partnerships with BNNL. They're about a half a mile up the road from us, and they are also in the building behind us. So we share a building, laboratory building that we'll talk about later, the Bioproducts Sciences Engineering Laboratory. So this partnership is very strong, and Tony is a big part of that. So I'm just going to turn it over to you.
All right, thanks. I appreciate the chance to give you the PNNL leadership perspective on our partnership with WSU, both generally and more specifically with the local campus here. I'm going to start with just sort of a personal comment that some folks who know me have heard many times, but my career was dramatically impacted by partnership with WSU. Right after 9/11, there was a national crunch, a need for radio and nuclear chemists. And I ran a group of radio and nuclear chemists that had the usual demographic bomb going off, right, with retirements, and the mission needs were surging. And it was really, to borrow a phrase from Chris's comments, we grew together. We achieved leadership together. I remember 20 years ago, the day I met Sue Clark, one of your faculty at the time. She's worked at your campus. She's worked for us. Now she's off at Savannah River. But we started a partnership there that really blossomed. And 8 years later, to go to the end of the story, there were multiple investigation groups coming, the National Academies, the IG, coming to figure out what had happened in Eastern Washington, because we managed to triple our capacity and capability in radio and nuclear chemistry at a time when other labs were struggling just to hold ground. And that was because of the partnership. So that was a big boost for me personally. So I like to start with a bluff. Again, those that know me, bottom line up front, bluff. And this partnership is strategic from our point of view. I'm going to give you 5 reasons why it's strategic. Some of them have to do with geography, but not all. One reason, of course, is geography leads to the fact that a significant fraction of PNNL staff are hired from WSU. That's just geography. And so we want WSU to be strong. Especially in this day and age, we want that pipeline to be robust and filled with high quality future employees. And it is, but that partnership is part of how we get it there. Second reason is we can influence agendas, especially state and regional agendas, together more effectively than we can apart. So on those occasions when we can align our agendas, we can really move things along. And I've seen that, and that's, again, a strategic benefit of the partnership. The third is maybe specific to us. As some know, we are the only DOE laboratory that has had a contract in place for almost 60 years now by Battelle, and has no university partners that are deeply integrated into that contract. So we seek to get the benefits that others may get from having universities in a formal partnership. We seek to get that through this strategic partnership that I'm here to describe, and it's working, right? It has benefits for us in terms of culture, and I'll come to that in a little bit. Let's see, the fourth reason would be what I'd call strategic success. And I'll get to that when I talk about the institutes. Sometimes we set ourselves a problem, a national mission problem that we can only solve together. And so that's strategic success. And finally, if we could go to the slide after this, I want to make a point, which is generic to collaboration, right? The plot, the inset plot shows the impact of our publications as a function of whether it's a single author, internal author, national collaboration, or international collaboration. I was stunned to see this plot about a month ago. Those publications on which we have interorganizational partnerships are better publications. They're higher impact publications. So our productivity and our mission impact goes up through partnership generally. And you can see that you're just essentially tied with the University of Washington for the university we collaborate the most with. So there's a lot of reasons why it's a strategic partnership. Now, how do I judge that it is in fact a successful partnership? I do that because the formal vehicles that I'll get to in a second, right? The means by which we collaborate, they're all maturing, they're all succeeding to increasing degrees. We've been at this for some time, but it's things that the vehicles are maturing. The relationship is strong top to bottom. That's another thing I look for, right? Director Ashby has a relationship with President Schultz. I have a relationship with Chris, and it just cascades down the organization to the researchers. It is top to bottom strong. And finally, a subtle point is it's resilient. We've had our challenges. I'm sure Sandra can commiserate with me, but we won't do that here. We've had our challenges, operational challenges of various sorts. But what has impressed me is we bounce back. We get through it, and it's wonderful. So back to the first slide. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, just a refresher on who PNNL is. If you go back to the previous slide. We are one of 50 FFRDCs in the nation, federally funded research and development centers. We're one of 17 DOE labs. We're one of 10 science labs stewarded by the Office of Science. We're one of 6 of those that are multi-program and fairly large in scale, over $1 billion. We are the only lab with its roots in chemistry, but we do much more than that today. In fact, we are far and away the most diverse laboratory in terms of mission, which you can see somewhat on that pie chart, and in terms of capability. The single largest project or program at PNNL is less than 10% of our budget. And that is actually astonishing if you know DOE labs. So we're very diverse. Let's see. I'm going to move on and talk about the various mechanisms by which we collaborate. So the first is what I would call strategy. And these are these 3 institutes. There's one centered on advanced power grid that has the goal. And by the way, I love all 3 of these in part because there is a nice strategic focus. There's clear mission relevance. There's a clear mandate for why we should do this, right? We're not just wanting to be one of a pack. We intend to lead. And the S&T challenge is substantial. So these are, to me, very appropriate strategic endeavors. But they are the advanced power grid, which is to accomplish advanced grid modeling to support planning and operations of complex power systems of the future. That's a real need. Number 2, bioproducts, transform engineered plants and industrial, agricultural, and municipal waste into valuable materials and chemicals. Again, nothing could be more timely. And finally, nuclear science and technology, which is where my personal story was anchored. We have a long history of collaborating in that area, but we're going to get it to the next level via this institute, which seeks to understand and control how materials evolve in radiation environments. So, we can talk about those for an hour, but that's all I'll give you there. There are strategic endeavors of the highest order that we're undertaking together. The second mechanism for our collaboration, go to the next slide, please. So this is showing you the increase in time of our joint appointees, right? And about roughly half of them are PNNL staff appointed to WSU, and half are the other way around. I call them outbound and inbound from my perspective. These are the glue that really makes this partnership work. And if you're curious, why did it rise and rise almost exponentially there and then level off? There was a deliberate shift that Chris and I collaborated on, a shift from quantity to quality, right? We got the program going. There are large numbers. Now we're really seeking to have joint appointees with fabulous impact for both our institutions and for the national research endeavors. So this is no small thing. Next slide shows you just some pictures of it. These are obviously just a sampling. And you'll see that several of them are based at WSU Tri-Cities. So the joint appointees are fabulous. And I think we even haven't gotten this to be everything that it can be, but it's already high impact. Next slide, please. So another set of things we do is we have distinguished graduate research programs, which is our way of helping you attract more and better graduate students, and again, achieve our objective of having a stronger pipeline. Right. So these are, I think, again, have a lot of room to grow. We're working hard on them, but I'm proud of these as well. The fourth mechanism I would cite, I guess this is maybe a side story, but I'm really pleased and excited by this. It has to do with data science. Right. Data science is a challenge right now for everybody. It's an extraordinarily fast-changing field. There's acute shortage across all employers nationally. It is what you call a hot skill. It's an economic driver for the region. And it is clearly a differentiator for those labs and universities that get it right. And I am enthused by WSU's willingness to consider standing up a new data science graduate program, which you guys are looking hard at. That, I think, could be a game changer for both of us. And we're partners with you on that as well. And then finally, and Sandra touched on this, there are assets that tie us together, right? The bioproducts, the building.
Bioproducts, Sciences, Engineering.
Thank you.
Laboratory. We call it Vessel.
Vessel.
That's easier.
I'm not so good at remembering acronyms, but Vessel is a building that we jointly inhabit. And it, again, ties our staff together. It's an asset that's critical to both of us. We're just in the process of opening a new $90 million science-funded facility called the Energy Scientists Center. You guys are wired into that facility. It's on our campus. I think we both have nuclear operations, such as your reactor, such as our Cat 2 nuclear facility, which does high-risk work, where we can leverage each other's assets, again, with due care, operationally speaking, but it can be done. And if we can both have access to a broader array of nuclear operations, that's a huge boost. And finally, I think that increasingly there are data sets that we're able to obtain and share as partners, such as grid operational data, that is really a differentiator for us both. So I hope I took an appropriate amount of time. I'd love to take a few questions.
Questions?
Could we get some follow-up info on the 3 institutes that you mentioned, just in terms of,
Absolutely.
where are they, who are they, and what are the top programs there?
You mean you would like written materials to review later?
Yeah, just
Yeah,
a little,
absolutely.
like a tear sheet on each one of them or
I'm
something.
sure that could either have it or could be easily made.
Okay, yeah, that would be terrific.
They typically have joint leaders, one from WSU and one from P&L, and again, a shared strategic endeavor, and usually a set of joint appointees who are sort of associated with that.
And then on the inbound and the outbound, sorry, Ron.
Go ahead.
On the inbound and the outbound, which is which? Because there were.
Well, if I'm speaking, inbound means it's a faculty member at WSU who we give rights and privileges to at P&L.
Yeah. so
Outbound would be the
Back
Congress.
to that slide, because it was just sort of looked like it was growing one way, but not the other, and I just wanted to understand that. So the, yeah. So the outbound is you appointing somebody to our faculty,
Correct. You approve them as faculty and give them some rights and privileges.
which is probably just a creature of what Chris talked about earlier, that you're probably growing more than we are in terms of the availability of people to fit that model.
Yeah, I think you're driving it. Why is it not 50-50 on that in terms of?
Well, just I'd love to see the growth both places. I mean, it's just you seem to be giving more to us, which is fine. I just was curious. Okay.
Yeah, we're not trying to, we just look for the right folks in it. Let the chips fall.
Yeah, no, it's all good.
You use the phrase grid systems. What's your vision of it?
So as a laboratory, we have staked out a leadership position in, advanced grid controls and grid scale storage. Those are our 2 primary ambitions. WSU brings strength to that I admit to not understanding the details of, but clearly brings strength in, I think, it's power systems and grid controls as well. And so we're partnering together to make sure, just as we did in nuclear and radiochemistry 20 years ago, to make sure that we can achieve leadership positions together that we couldn't achieve separately. Did that answer your question?
Who else is in that field?
You're getting to a level of detail. I might need help from Chris or somebody else.
And I'll talk to you afterwards.
Okay.
Grid systems are a subject that came up in a meeting I was in. So you used it, and I kept thinking, well, be in 2 different meetings and hear the phrase, and I didn't understand it the first time I was told, but you made it plainer to me. I just need to know.
So I can give you one more bit of strategic context, which is that the decarbonization that the nation and the world is undertaking will require renewables.
Yes.
It will require electrification.
Yes.
That's a given,
Yes.
right? That will strain today's power grid, and it will create different ways that demand and supply are handled by the grid that just today's grid is not ready for. And so that's the challenge we have to rise to.
Thank you.
Yes, I heard you say that data science is a fast growing field and there's a shortage of talent, and that it would be great if WSU could help stand up a new graduate program. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So there's an insatiable need for data scientists. We, like everybody, if you read, the press, the Great Resignation, the end of the pandemic, all that, everybody's struggling to hire people of all sorts. It is most acute for certain areas such as data science. we managed to do something. I think that I can say this. I'm comfortable saying this. We've become leaders within the DOE system in what you call deep machine learning, data science generally, and we've been at it for 30 years. That's part of how we manage that. So we saw the revolution coming perhaps a little faster and jumped on it a little more aggressively. We literally have hundreds of people that do that. We also have a 15% attrition rate in that area, which is, I mean, now if that was Google or Amazon, they'd think that was great. But at a national lab, no. And so we need a lot of folks. And we also have seen other universities, not many, but others that have really moved into that field in a deliberate way and done really well as a result. And so one of the ideas that was hatched through this partnership was perhaps a new program at WSU that produced graduates in that area, brought you strength, faculty, opportunities for research, all kinds of great things. And we pick up the graduates at a rate that would exceed our ability to do so otherwise. That's the general idea. I'm not sure if that answered your question.
No, it did. Thank you.
Question, what's behind the attrition rate?
Well, that's a sociological question. My personal belief is it's somewhat the result of during the pandemic, there was suppressed attrition. It's also the fact that an increasing number of commercial enterprises believe that their future depends on getting data science right. They will pay whatever they have to get that talent. We as government contractors struggle to keep pace with that. But again, even at the companies, the talent is moving around at an amazing rate. And we get handicapped by the fact that we often require US citizens as well. So they're in demand. Everybody needs them. I think it's that short. But again, it's far beyond data science, but I'd say that's the epicenter.
So just more of a comment. One of the ways that PNNL really does contribute is by having some of your staff actually come over and teach selected courses at WSU. And I experienced with my youngest daughter that she took a senior level course from one of your biological science from one of your researchers, totally changed the trajectory of her career direction. And so it's just, I think it's probably a lot of the researchers really enjoy teaching. So it gives them an outlet, but for sure it can be of great value in stimulating thinking and research interest of WSU Tri-Cities.
You're absolutely right. Hopefully we can provide courses and that are of value to you, but you're absolutely right. I know, in fact, buried on this plot behind me is cases where we would have lost somebody because they just had an itch to be involved in universities' operations and teach courses and mentor students. And because of a joint appointment, they were able to do that. And we don't lose them that. So it's another benefit of the partnership. All right. Any other questions, or am I? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed the opportunity.
Thank you, Tony. Really appreciate it. I think a couple of things, just as a quick follow-up. If you want more information about that major, Kate McAteer, not used to it. Kate McAteer is here, and she can tell you she's been working on that major with PNNL and other people here at WSU across the system. Also, she would have a good idea of how many of our adjuncts actually come from PNNL. It's a great resource for us here to have the knowledge base in our teachers that they bring to us. So it's fabulous. So anyway, she'll be here. She'll be here until Tuesday. Okay, so anyway, thank you so much for the opportunity to discuss the research assets of WSU Tri-Cities. As Chris mentioned, we don't often talk about the research assets that are here or on the Vancouver campus. We mostly focus on Pullman and Spokane, but I think it's very important that you all understand what kind of research is happening here, because all of the campuses are part of the land grant mission, and we are all research intensive institutions. What we do is we use the assets I would say, unparalleled assets of our community, our region, to advance that mission, that R1 mission here in the Tri-Cities. So if you go to this next one, we did do our strategic plan a couple of years ago. You've probably seen not much about it since then, but we developed our 5-year strategic plan and released it late in 2020. Goal 2 of that plan is to elevate research and creative work as part of the WSU mission as a land grant institution. The campus has 2 key performance indicators associated with elevating research and scholarship, and that's represented in our new dashboard. You can find that online. It's public facing, and this is just goal 2. And it includes tracking our research expenditures and the number of grants that we have received. So I'd like to take a little closer look now at our research expenditures over the last 6 years. Chris touched on them earlier. But each of the bars in the chart shows direct and indirect cost expenditures of research. You can see that we're obtaining about 20% of indirect cost returns on our research grants. The actual amount of funding we receive from indirect cost return has not really increased much in the last 6 years. And partly that's because some of the grants that we get don't come with the F&A, the indirect cost return. We get a lot of grants from private industry, especially in life sciences, and that they come with no F&A. And so even though our research is increasing in that area, we're not seeing the indirect return that we would like to see. We do project an increase in expenditures into 2026, and we base this on 2 assumptions. The first is that direct costs will increase because we will have new faculty that will receive grants, or our faculty here will continue to receive grants. And secondly, indirect costs will increase as we begin to be focused on helping our faculty obtain those grants. So we've got Christine Portfors is in the audience, and she has been working with us as our Vice Chancellor for Research and has done a great job in mentoring our faculty, not only toward tenure, but also toward how to obtain the grants that they need. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, WSU Tri-Cities research goals focus on the assets unique to the Mid-Columbia region with its strong agricultural presence, an abundance of clean energy sources, and a history of restoring the environment. The Tri-Cities occupies a setting comprised of a rich and integrated foundation in agriculture and food processing, including our lovely vineyards and our wineries. And we'll hear a little bit more about that later. We also have a very rich infrastructure in energy. We have solar, wind, hydro, nuclear, you name it, it's here. As you heard this morning, when Bob Schutz stood up, he said that Energy Northwest is completely decarbonized, except for their forklifts. But other than that, they are completely decarbonized. And they are also a selected site by X Energy for an advanced reactor placement. So we'll be seeing that soon. We also have a large presence in biofuels, which you'll also hear about. And that happens, a lot of that research happens here on campus in our Bessel facility. So we take bio stock and turn it into jet fuel or renewable natural gas or, and other kinds of products that you'll see. We also have a very beautiful high desert landscape with the Columbia River running right through it. And we have a commitment in the Mid-Columbia region to preserve this land and put it to its best use. We also have a promise to clean up the area that was damaged by our World War II national defense activities, and we're moving quite rapidly on that cleanup effort now. The region boasts some of the cheapest and cleanest energy production in the United States, and that is coupled with a strong transportation and transmission systems that deliver this energy across the Pacific Northwest. With these capabilities, we really believe that the region is ripe for becoming a center for current and future alternative fuels and power, such as hydrogen, or as I mentioned earlier, renewable bio-natural gas. with our industry partners, which you've had a chance to interact with today. We are poised to sort of change the reputation of the Tri-Cities from clean up to clean energy. And we're very excited about that mission. So what I'd like to do now is to introduce you to some of the Tri-Cities researchers and some of the vast and varied research that's going on here in the Tri-Cities, from the sciences to the humanities, but all largely focused on energy, the environment, and agriculture. So very diverse fields, and as you'll see, and terrific people. So the first person I'd like to bring up is Dr. Zhao Zhang, forgive me. He's Associate Professor of Chemical Engineering in Voiland School of Chemical Engineering and Bioengineering, and he is in our Bessel laboratory. His research focuses on enabling carbon neutral energy and industrial products, and you'll see some of those products today. Next person that we will highlight is Dr. Jonas Dimici. Dr. Dimici is Associate Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering here at Washington State University Tri-Cities, and his current research focuses on hydroclimatology and water resource sustainability. The third person that we'll bring up is Dr. Sarah Rowley. She's an assistant professor in the School of Environment. Her research area focuses on water quality and nutrient cycling, especially in agricultural ecosystems. And then we will hear from Tom Collins, who, I just flipped that too soon, who is associate professor in viticulture and enology, and uses advanced analytical instrumentation and multivariate analysis to study the composition of grapes, wines, and distilled spirits. He has the job we'd all like to have. But his current research is really focused on smoke-affected wines due to the vineyards being exposed to smoke, especially with all the wildfires that we've been having. And I forgot Bob Bauman, last but not least, certainly not least. Dr. Bob Bauman is Professor of History and Academic Director of Arts and Sciences at Washington State University Tri-Cities. And he's going to share with you his research that addresses key questions about race in the Hanford region and in the American West. He does this by exploring the experiences of Indigenous peoples, Japanese American residents of the area, and African Americans from World War II through the 1970s. So his work is exceptional. All right, so Dr. Zhang, I'd like to invite you up. Now, we recommend that you ask questions. Don't be shy throughout presentations. We will talk about the 2 questions that Kirk talked about, but feel free to ask questions as we go.
Can I stand here?
Yes, excellent.
Very good. Thank you very much, Chancellor Hens, for the nice introduction. And thank you for the opportunity to present on behalf of Bessel. Bioproducts Science Engineering Laboratory. Bessel is a 57,000 square feet research facility, houses both WSU researchers and the PNL scientists. And there are 4 faculties residing in Bessel: Dr. Bagita Irving, Dr. Binyan, Dr. Han Lei, and myself. Although we are working on different research fields, and we all have a common goal to support the sustainable bioproducts, bioenergy development. Each of us are recognized the expert in our own field, and nationally, internationally, and we have been fortunate to obtain some of the highly prestigious awards, such as NSF Career Award and the Young Faculty Award from Ghana. Despite the pandemics in the last 2 years also, Bessel has maintained its high productivities in the last 2 years also, and we have received a research award grant over $4 million with an expenditure within the same period of times and over $3 million. Combined 4 groups, and we have published over 100 scientific journal publications, and in last year we have 2 US patents issued, and one of the technology has been licensed. to a major US packaging companies. So I think Dr. and Pins will have some of souvenirs, and that is some of the packaging material made more than 95% of renewable materials.
And this is actually under contract by Blue Apron. If you use Blue Apron, you get this in your boxes.
Yeah. So, so part of our access is really owing to strong support of the administrations, both from WSU Tri-City campus and the Pullman campus. However, it's unfortunate that Dr. Michael Walcott will be leaving us as the Bessel director, and we're looking forward to work with Dr. Joshua Hind as the new Bessel director. Now, so I think we're all aware of the major problems facing our society nowadays. Really, the Bessel research is designed to strengthen the three pillars supporting the sustainable human development. So our research is really dedicated towards the development, deployment of new clean energy solutions. And we also devote our research to and create new bio-based products, materials that can move us away from fossil-based economies. Situated in Washington State, and we also make a great effort and to develop innovative technologies, identify new solutions to enhance the long-term competitiveness of our agriculture, the forest industries. Why are we doing this research? And Bessel is committed and to foster new generations of workforce for future bioeconomy. I can probably talk for days about our research projects and research activities, given the large portfolio Bessel is currently undergoing. I try to use these slides to highlight a few and ongoing projects, some of the illustrations. We're very interested in fundamental science, and one of the areas we try to understand is the nature characteristics of the nature polymers, molecules that made up trees and grass. And we try to gain in-depth understandings so we can design the most efficient pathways to utilize them for bioenergy and biofuels. Collectively, Bessel is well known for developing practical energy solutions. And here are a few examples that Dr. Badiri is looking at how to convert a small wastewater treatment plant for biofuel production. Dr. Vineyards is looking at how to turn agricultural waste to aviation fuels. And Dr. Hagule is now investigating how to convert plastics and to the jet fuels. Besides applied and fundamental research, Bessel has demonstrated its unique capability to transfer the research outcomes to the marketplace. And there are two technologies now entering into commercial testing stage, and one of which, and Chancellor Hind just viewed, it's a very sample. And if you can find it, and there are more uses of WA inside, for examples. Since Bessel's inception about 13 years ago, and we have produced more than 100 graduate, undergraduate, and research associates. I want to emphasize here, Bessel is not just the four faculties. And Bessel is a research collaboration networks interacting with Pullman on the WSU campus, national labs, domestic and international institutions. And Bessel is also a key player in WSU-led Center for Excellence in Aviation Fuels, as well as WSU P&L Joint Bioproducts Institute. And over the last decade, we have developed a very strong collaboration with our industrial partners, and that really facilitated us to push some of the research outcomes and through commercial market. And hopefully, soon enough, WSU research will be showing its impact in the real world. So I have, thank you. Any questions?
I would say that the waste, just adding on to that, that the using waste products from wastewater is being piloted in Walla Walla due to Dr. Arian's research right now. So already having impact, and like I said, not marshmallows, but this is, say it again, how many, 95% biodegradable? So really a great thing to have your styrofoam be biodegradable and recyclable. So questions?
You have you ever talk to the Gates Foundation? This is their big funding thing at the moment. I mean, they're pushing really hard. I'm assuming that I was listening to your body of work. I was going to go a whole series of subjects. They're trying to fund all of them. So I'm assuming that you're talking to them and they're talking to you.
We have not specifically talked to Gates Foundation yet. So, and I need to also add this, and we have a lot of support from the Office of Research and Office of Commercialization in terms of pushing these technology into the market. And they have been in conversation with many of the other funding agencies. I think, we look at the Gates Foundation at one point, and they have these list of fundings, and we were not able to identify specifically and relate to that. So, but we did, talk to many of the other organizations. Now, and I need to mention that this technology now licensed to a U.S. packaging company already. So then there are some collaborative efforts pursuing large support.
I just typed Bill Gates's name in my phone.
Right.
Bill Gates understands the importance of biofuel systems. Popped up right away. And my neighbor actually has known him for a zillion years, and I used to be his neighbor in on the east side. But I don't know whether, if you can give me something, I can give it to her. I want to tickle them to see whether or not I want to tickle them.
Definitely. So, I'll get your contact information. So we'll
Please. Thank you.
Doctor, this seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this seems like one of the best kept secrets in our region. How do we make this more known to others, not only to attract more people here, but future customers and perhaps more research?
what exactly was your question?
Well, it's more of a statement, but it just seems like everything you're talking about is super sexy. And this should be being promoted, in my view. This is the first I'm hearing about the wonderful things that WSU is doing in this area of research. And you would think that we could build some very exciting narrative around what's happening here and elevate the school and its prominence, and which, it becomes a virtuous cycle, and it starts building upon each other, and you get more momentum behind you.
Exactly, and I think in the bigger picture, there was one discussion we had with Chancellor Haynes is one of the ways that can promote WSU research, really establish some type of ecosystem infrastructures, and not only we're able to promote the research, but it generates an environment that we can interact and publicize research.
So I think partly your question gets to what Kirk was alluding to earlier is, there's a reason that we're here in the Tri-Cities, and for your research, I'd like you to address that. But there's also, how can we make Bessel even a greater force and more prominent in the world of research and in even the product terms? How can we do that? So that's two long questions. And one of the things I would like to emphasize too here is that we were able, and we thank the system for helping us do that, we were able to hire a Bessel director. So that person will be coming on as soon as, we think. I shouldn't speak too soon. There's one more hurdle. The person will be coming on as soon as possible if that one hurdle is overcome. He will also be the co-director of the Bioproducts Institute. So that will be a direct connection with PNNL that we haven't had in the past. That researcher, the prior co-director was in Pullman, and the co-director will be here now. And I think that that will help us a great deal in getting the story out and also elevating the research. So he'll do both Vessel and Bioproducts Institute. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Also,
Yes, jump in.
Yeah, just Regents or Regents has both their questions. Yeah, I mean, Sandra mentioned the PNL collaboration. That's one strategic way to get the word out about bioproducts. Sort of in addition to the other factors. The other is the FAA Center for Aviation Excellence, which is a longstanding WSU effort that Professor Wolcott chairs. That John talked about a little bit. And finally, Regent Sims. I need to talk to our foundation folks about their contacts. They've had meetings. They haven't talked.
Yeah, I have a question, Dr. Zhang. How much partnership and collaboration is also occurring with the WSU Business School as you look at your technical research and connect it to the strategic need for the transition economy, globally. So when I see what you're doing and how it plugs into sustainability development goals globally, there's still a need to translate also not just for commercialization, but policy and the big strategic transition economy. So is there an internal collaboration that occurs with the business school or across other of your programs to address that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, and as I mentioned, our research is actually, it is a network of research, not only the vessel, and I personally interact with many departments of enrollment, and they also contribute to some of the technologies that we need. And yes, and that's a very good suggestion. We actually started interacting with the WSU Business School to identify the paths in terms of tech transfer, commercialization, market analysis, so on and so forth. And we actually carried out some works with some of the business schools in the past. So this is now time because the portfolio will generate perhaps and can collectively working with the business. I think I talked to them and sometimes. Very good suggestion. We'll follow up on that.
So another thing is that a couple of other things that we're doing here locally is that we have just developed this last year an entrepreneur in residence program. And that entrepreneur in residence program is working with our engineering school in particular to get them that business acumen and the business background that they need to go out in the world and be successful engineers especially if they're going to start their own company. So that's one of the ways we're kind of working with the business school. The other, if I reveal it here, you'll be the first to know. But we've been thinking, we developed the Institute for Northwest Energy Futures here. And as part of that, we're looking at curriculum. And one of the things we're looking at is perhaps an MBA with an emphasis in energy and sustainability. So we're working on those paths right now.
What have you done, or have you done anything to get media coverage of the type of research you're doing here? Back on what John was asking. That's one way of telling your story and getting other people to know who you are and what you're doing.
Well, some of our technology actually have been relatively well published, right? So and all promoted. And if you look at WSU, styrofoam has been appeared a couple of times. And the other one is we're developing these materials to protect the tree fruit from frost protection. And I'm a bit of muffled sound because I was outside to prepare those. And the last night wind. So because we're frosted and the last night tonight. So, and those things are well and sort of published. Perhaps we need to do more work. So this way it's communicated with a broad audience.
So I think the other answer to your question is, and Phil's right there in the audience, and he can jump in anytime that he would like to. But as we move toward the one WSU model, We have a focus in communication, marketing and communication on more system-wide efforts to get our story out into the world. And so I think that that's going to help us a great deal as well. And I honestly believe that the well-kept secret piece here is that it is time for us to, really show what we're doing. I would say not only on this campus, but also in Vancouver, because we do some very powerful research. I'm hoping that you're seeing that already. I was just going to mention, for those of you who are not attending the Research and Academic Affairs Committee, there's going to be more on this discussion about getting the word out and getting our light from under the bushel. And if you're not attending that, the PowerPoint is in the packet, and so you can still see some of the information we'll be presenting. So, what do you need to grow your research endeavors here in the Tri-Cities?
It's always a risky question. As an academicians, I'll be asking for money, space, resources.
I knew that would be the answer.
But if you look at it, sort of WSU Tri-City campus as a perspective, so as I mentioned, it's really generating ecosystem that facilitate research communication. And it's very important because I've been kept learning other faculties and the research, even from the last few weeks. And it's fascinating, wine research, Yakima River effects on assignment, and histories. And they're all fascinating. And some of our research really benefited from the collaboration with WSU colleagues, for example. And it started from technologies that wouldn't be happening if I did not talk to our faculties in the seas, which are this campus. So, and as frosting protections and researchers, really, we had a casual talk with a horticulture professor. So I think, if we have this sort of generate a direct ecosystems to facilitate their communication, and WSU as Tri-City location has a huge potential, and I can tell you the reason that attracts me to this campus is really adjacent to the P&L. And this is one of major factors. And we have all the engineering companies and a lot of the resources here. So that is really, those are the catalysts.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it. Don't go too far. You can sit down, but don't go too far. Okay, I'd like to now introduce you to Dr. Jonas Dimici. Again, he's an associate professor in civil and environmental engineering here at Tri-Cities.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present my research, which have basically three focus areas. So the first focus area is hydroclimatology, where I'm interested in studying the links between climate and specifically hydrological extremes, with the goal of contributing to climate resilience community. The second objective I have for focus area is sustainable water resource management. Again, here I study the links between energy, food production, and water, with a goal of improving the production while minimizing impact on water. And then the third objective I have is on resilience stormwater system. In this case, I study the links between urbanization, stormwater, and water quality. And again, my objective here is improve the stormwater designs and at the same time reduce flood events in major cities and urban areas. So in the next few slides, I'll give you some example projects that I've been working on in those areas. So the first one is, again, is hydroclimatology. So in most cases, I spend my time trying to improve prediction of hydrological extremes, try to improve water management and infrastructure designs under consideration of climate change and uncertainties. Our project was funded by DOD. As you guys know, DOD considers climate change as a national security threat. For example, over the past 30 years, about 930 military sites impacted by flood. And more recently, a storm-made flood event in Florida and Nebraska caused about 500 million damage on the 2 military bases, which highlights the severity of the flood impact on those military installation and military readiness. So our project for this task was to do assessment, risk assessment, flood risk assessment under current and future climate conditions, and then provide updated engineering design parameters for flood control systems. The second focus area I have is sustainable water resource. And in this case, I'm mostly interested on, again, improving production of food and energy while minimizing impact on either water resource and qualities. And recently, I've been working on a project funded by DOE, where we study the potential impact of large-scale biofuel production on water quality and water resource, just to ensure biofuel is not just a renewable or carbon neutral alternative fuel, but we want it to be sustainable in regards to water and other environmental aspects. So we've been doing water footprint and life cycle analysis for biofuel in Mississippi Basin, where majority of corn-based ethanol are produced in the US. And then the next thematic area I have is resilience stormwater systems. And here I'm mostly interested on reducing flood events and water quality issues in major cities through a better forecasting system, and integrated use of both green and traditional stormwater systems. We have a couple of projects funded by USGS and City of Renton, where we try to improve the design and implementation of green infrastructures, green stormwater systems in the cities, under consideration of future expansion of the cities and future changes in climate change. And in terms of implication of my research on the regions, as you all know, water is Washington's most valuable resource, supporting the nation's most prominent agriculture, commercial fishing, and hydroelectric powers. So my research contributes to the sustainable use of this valuable state resource. And at the same time, I aim to help our state communities to be climate resilient. So that's all I have.
Dr. Dimici, there are parts of our world that are running out of drinking water and water shortage, right? And so we're very fortunate in Washington. What research is being done around the social aspect of water availability and accessibility? There's infrastructure, there's social need, right? You're going to have the haves and the have-nots. How does that get integrated into the technical studies? Because, there's going to be a lot of human conflict here.
Yeah, just to give you a background, I come from Ethiopia, so I grew up in a place where water shortage is not just a research endeavor,
right?
It's a survival in some part of the country. So I've been grown in a famine, or I see famines in my country. And that's one of the reasons for me to pursue this line of research. So the social, we talk about, I'm talking the science. But the social aspect is also another issue we have in how to manage and use in a fair and equitable way of this limited resource. There is currently, I think, there is in our community, in the hydrology community, we have now they call it hydrosocial. There is a discipline now is growing just to address that aspect of it. This human is one component of this complex process. So how do you communicate and address that issue? So there is always that challenge, but I think it's something to be tackled. It's not just a science.
I just think that's another cross-discipline type of opportunity. And it's one of those that's so invisible right now, it's not going to, it will become a crisis very quickly. So it might be another leadership opportunity for WSU.
I think one of the most exciting things about Dr. Dimici's research is the fact that he's thinking ahead in his research. So how, you know, if we're doing using hydropower, or if we're doing biofuels, how does that affect our water supply? And making sure that that's a sustainable water supply moving forward, because that's a very important question to the world today. And so I really appreciate that piece of the research, even if I don't completely understand all of it, but yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so there was a lot of push, I mean, during Obama era, 2008, when this replacing alternative fuel with biofuel come up or get traction. And one of the major issues we had is how much water is consumed, especially the ethanol-based corn, Mississippi Delta. I mean, a lot of fertilizer is going to go into the system. It could be carbon neutral and renewable source. But I don't know, we may be overlooking the water aspect of it. And at the end, that may not make that thing sustainable. So there was a lot of reservation at that time from the environment groups. And even I think even some of the people who have been pushing the idea. But again, it doesn't mean it's a roadblock, but I think it's something we need to be taken into account. So we will make that process, I think, more efficient.
I had a follow-up comment similar to the interdisciplinary idea Regent Ramos floated. All the regents have a sphere of influence that we live our normal lives in. But all of us are concerned about carbon impact and reducing our individual carbon footprints or our industry. I happen to make my living in agriculture, so I see a picture of a center pivot. I view a lot of the wonderful topics we've talked about. Sometimes it's just bumping around the edges of improving things a little bit. It seems to me in agriculture, if we really want to make a quantum leap forward on carbon impact, it's what can we do, what can we discover, or what can we work on to improve on how we produce nitrogen. All these crops need nitrogen to grow. I happen to apply ammonia. And ammonia is very efficient for me to apply because it's 82% nitrogen. It's easy to get because the air we breathe is, chemists can tell me, 78% nitrogen. So, you know, it's a high percentage. So nitrogen's all around us. Just how can we get it in a form that I can use? And at present, it's the Haber-Bosch process, usually fueled by natural gas. And is there research going on in our purview to somehow use renewable energy to crack that nut and make it not only a way to get for me to get nitrogen, but NH3 is a good way to store hydrogen.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely.
And there's a lot of potential there. I'd like to see us be a huge leadership role in that.
You must be a plant, because that brings us to Dr. Sarah Rowley, who's going to talk about some of that some of what you've talked about. But I think that's one of the things as we're talking about why are we doing research in the Tri-Cities in these areas. It's because we have the capabilities to do exactly what you're saying. Is we have the keys. We haven't put them all together yet, but we have the keys to be able to help really solve the energy issues and the environmental issues that come up, including the fertilizer. Fertilizer is a huge issue when we're talking energy or we're talking environment, and that is definitely on our radar. So if there's no more questions for Dr. Dimici, I might just call up Dr. Rowley.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, welcome to the Tri-Cities. We're glad you're here. I'm going to follow up on your question in a bit, but first, I have 2 vignettes I'd like to share with you about research that's going on in my lab and with my collaborators. And the first one is local to the Yakima River. And the question we're addressing is, does overabundant plant growth inhibit fish? And so what I'm showing here is a graph of oxygen concentrations in the Yakima River. They go up during the day when photosynthesis happens, and then at night, respiration or oxygen consumption brings them down. That's a typical pattern for freshwater systems. But what's happening in the Yakima is you see it's dropping below that 8 milligrams per liter threshold. And when it does that, fish, particularly salmon, don't do very well. So salmon migrate up the Yakima River, and they're hesitant to migrate up the Yakima when oxygen is low. So a grad student in my lab, Erin Pelly, found that the likely culprit is this plant, water stargrass. And like all plants, it photosynthesizes during the day, but at night it's respiring. And the water stargrass in the Yakima River, thanks to hydrologic changes in the river, now covers really the entire width of the river. And so the net effect of all that plant respiration is to drive the oxygen down. And Erin found it's about 90% of the total respiration is happening just with this plant. So what do we do about it? So the next step is we're going to remove it. So we're working with Benton Conservation District. They obtained this plant harvester. It's got a little cutting edge below, so it cuts the plant, and the plants move up that conveyor belt into the hopper at the back, and then they can take them to shore and they can be composted offsite. So our part of this project is funded by the Washington Water Research Center. We're going to look at, first of all, is oxygen. If we remove a whole bunch of these plants, we get those oxygen levels back up to a place where the fish are doing well. But there's other things that plants do as well. We want to make sure we're also understanding the other consequences. So what's happening with nutrient uptake, water velocity, temperature, we want to know all of that as well, so we can weigh positives and negatives of removing this water stargrass. And of course, fish populations are really important as well. And so we're working with Yakima Nation Fisheries will be documenting the effects on those fish populations. And all of this is part of the challenge of managing the lower Yakima River. So we ask a lot of this river. We would like it to have healthy salmon runs, water for irrigation for agriculture, recreation, drinking water. And at the same time, it's undergoing a lot of stressors. We've got a declining snowpack in the Cascade Mountains. We have altered flows, more water, low oxygen. And managing water stargrass is really one piece of that puzzle of understanding how to manage the lower Yakima River. But it's not just the lower Yakima River. This is not, these stressors are not unique to this ecosystem. They happen at rivers across the globe. And what we find in the Yakima River will probably be generalizable elsewhere. And in particular, we don't know a lot about how plants impact river ecosystems. We know how they impact lakes, wetlands, but there hasn't been much study in rivers. And so this is going to be an important piece of understanding how to manage rivers elsewhere as well. I'm going to pause there because my second vignette goes in a completely different direction. So if you have any questions about this project, I'd be happy to address them now before I move on. Yeah.
So just from a lake standpoint, you know, if you live on a lake and as part of the state, you know that like removing certain plants almost causes them to come back tenfold. So how does that work for this particular one, and what does that look like once you removed it? Are they gone, or will they? How does this look?
We expect that if harvesting is what's going to work, it's going to be an annual thing.
Okay.
Because they grow, they vegetatively reproduce, so they're going to do exactly what they do in lakes. Yeah. We would expect and come right back. Okay. And so if it works, it's just something we have to build into our management plan for this river.
How have the treaty tribes helped you?
They have been really there's this whole group of agencies that Benton Conservation District has really brought together. Yakima Nation is a really important part of this because the fish are really important to them. So they're working directly with us on this project. One thing I didn't mention is a follow-up project is we're going to be working up by the Prosser Dam. They've got an area there that they're really interested in. So they've got funding for sensors. We've got a graduate student who's really interested. So they're going to fund the sensors and our grad student is going to look at the data and interpret it. So we've been working pretty closely with them.
They have federal leverage. And so it is easy to use them to get a lot of resource, particularly out of the Biden administration, which is very sensitive to Native American issues. So I'm assuming they're building that bridge as well on your behalf. So it's not going to be Washington State University, it's going to be this partnership that's to be funded.
Yeah, that's a great question. We've, I don't know the specifics of that, but they've been really active in conservation in this area. So I'm guessing they probably are. And we've really just started working with them over the past couple of years. And so far it's worked really well. So I'm hoping we can continue to build that partnership.
Yeah, my question was about the involvement with the Yakima Nation.
Okay,
So,
great.
thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to continue on to the second vignette then. And the second question we're addressing is how much food can grasses get out of thin air? So when I say getting food out of thin air, I'm talking about nitrogen fixation, which some of you apparently are already familiar with, but in case you're not, nitrogen fixation is the process by which N2 gas gets converted to ammonia by bacteria. And we often talk about this in legumes, things like soybeans, clover, peanuts. They have these little root nodules that house the nitrogen fixing bacteria, and there's this mutualism where they are exchanging nitrogen for carbon. But there's a whole suite of free living nitrogen fixers that lives in the soil as well. So they're not inside a plant nodule, but they have some kind of association with plants. We haven't fully defined that relationship yet. And what we found is that switchgrass, which is a perennial prairie grass, can get a substantial amount of its nitrogen from these free living N fixers. So we found that out, but we learned this from incubating soil cores, working in greenhouses. And the next step is we want to get realistic in the field rates. So here's what we're doing. We got a grant from the National Science Foundation to do this work, and we put in these stainless steel music houses. So this is a stainless steel box. It's about 0.5 meter in diameter, it goes down 75 centimeters. And way back in 2018, we installed a bunch of these into some switchgrass fields in Michigan. So I've got a Michigan State collaborator on the backhoe, and then a WSU postdoc, Dr. Carmela Vitsa, is over helping them out. So we transplanted switchgrass. They've been sitting there getting used to their musicosm homes. And this summer, we are going to add 15N2. So that's the stable isotope. It's a rare isotope, and we can use it as a tracer. So we're going to put a gas tight lid on. We're going to inject this 15N2 gas, and then we can trace that into the tissues of switchgrass and find out how much nitrogen they're getting from fixation. Our Cornell University collaborators are going to also trace it into the bodies of the microbes so we can figure out which microbes are doing the fixing. We're super excited about this. And then over here, I have Shanika Sankey. She is one of the recipients of the WSU P&L Distinguished Graduate Research Fellowship. She's really interested in fungi. And fungi are also really important partners with plants. And so she's looking at how the presence or absence of fungi influences nitrogen fixation rates and whether they're benefiting each other or are they antagonistic. She's trying to figure that out. And so here she's finishing up a greenhouse experiment at WSU. She's now over at P&L using their tools to figure out the exchange of nutrients between the plants and the microbes. Like I said, I'm super excited about this. I hope you are too, but there's also some application here beyond just my interest. And that application is that switchgrass is used in agriculture. It's used as a forage crop in pastures and for hay. It's also used for biofuel. So this photo is of switchgrass harvest in Michigan. And if we don't need fertilizer to grow it, if they can get all of its nitrogen from microbes, it's much more sustainable. We then don't have the issues with harmful algal blooms, nutrient runoff, greenhouse gases that are all associated with nitrogen fertilizer additions. Switchgrass is also used in prairie restorations. And if we understand a little better how it's working with microbes or not, we can do a better job of restoring those prairies as well. I wanted to mention one more thing. There was some questions about the socioeconomics of some of these issues we brought up. And I wanted to point out that WSU was recently awarded an NRT, which is a training grant for graduate students. And both Jonas and I are part of that grant. It's intended to give students an opportunity to get some training in the social sciences so that what they're doing is this work that's applicable to communities and to these bigger social issues. They have some training working in that area as well. So we've just started that grant. First cohort of grad students will be starting in the fall. And with that, I can take any additional questions.
Did you get your question answered?
Well, that's fascinating work. I was more intrigued by more of a chemical engineering process field of study as well. For the since in this area you're going to have commercial sized potato growers.
The chemical engineer.
Oh, I'm not going to speak to that. I don't do any real engineering work anymore. But talk a little bit about some of the challenges of doing some of your scholarship research here, because I think you've had to go back and forth with Pullman for some equipment needs and things like that. As Regent Redmond asked about blockers, you've developed a really fantastic research program here that's nationally recognized, but that has not been without some challenges. And I'd just love for you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think for me, the big challenge is people. So I'm the only one in my department here. There's some adjunct faculty, but I'm the only tenure track faculty member. And so like you said, one thing that we do often in departments is we share equipment. We have conversations in the hallway about collaboration. And I have great colleagues in Pullman and Vancouver across the system. The schooling environment has been really great for working across the system. But there is a disadvantage of being the only one physically here. So I miss out on some of those organic hallway conversations. And often what we would do is I'd say, in a different institute, in a place with more faculty, I might say, if you let me run samples on your gas chromatograph, you can run samples on my auto analyzer. I don't have that person here. And so I go back and forth to Pullman quite a bit to do that. We can do it in a day, it's a 2.5-hour drive, but it would be great to have more faculty here that I could collaborate with in that way.
So just because I'm curious about the intersection between what Brett is worried about and what you're worried about. So so I guess let me ask a question. So the posit or the thesis here is that this will reduce the need for fertilizer. So are you sort of augmenting the biological processes to reduce the need for fertilizer? Or it sounded more like you were trying to figure out whether the system itself is doing what it needs to do without the aid of fertilizer, because maybe fertilizer is being applied when it's not necessary. But are you approaching like the need for fertilizer and replacing it with something that's more sustainable? Or are you saying, hey, look, we're just going to prove that you don't need to fertilize this stuff?
So first, we're just trying to understand the process, right? So, and more your second issue with perennial grasses in particular. One thing we know, the whole impetus for this project is we were doing a nitrogen fertilizer study where we had different levels of fertilizer and then we compare the yield. What you expect to see is it goes up and then plateaus at some point. And the point where it plateaus is that's to keep the amount of fertilizer you want. But after a few years, we had a straight line. In other words, no fertilizer was yielding just as much as any amount of fertilizer. And so we said, well, why is this? And nitrogen fixation seemed like the most reasonable explanation. So then we proceeded. So now we're getting at is showing, is that really true? Is it really fixation? But then the other part of it is under what conditions does this occur? And that's been a really interesting procedure because it seems to occur in these episodes. So there's times when it's fixing tons of nitrogen and then times when not much is happening. And so that's part of what we're getting at with this new grant is, first of all, how much per year? Is it really enough to sustain it? And then second of all, when does it occur? And if we know when it occurs, we can also understand, if we've got a year where conditions are not appropriate for fixation, maybe that's when we add some fertilizer. And so it's getting at both saying, no, we don't need it, but also are there conditions where we might need it and trying to figure out those kinds of details.
Yeah, good, thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else? Thank you so much.
Yes.
So next we have Dr. Tom Collins with the job that everybody wants. And I think he's going to do a slight interactive activity with you if you were wondering what those red solo cups were in front of you. Here's another one.
All right, well, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to come and present to you this morning. I really appreciate the chance to show off some of the things we're doing. I am part of the viticulture and enology program here.
So we're having
Tri-Cities
communion.
campus. We have a total of 4 faculty members housed in Mine Science Center, which is just up the hill on the other edge of campus. A relatively new facility, terrific lab resources. We have a world-class research winery, so it's a great place to work and do this research. So I do a fair amount of my work there, but I also use the vineyard facilities at the Prosser IREC Center, so the Irrigated Ag Research Extension Center in Prosser. And I'll show you some of the things we're doing in both places. But I want to go on to the next slide. So what I want to showcase today is the work that we are doing to address an industry problem. We have this issue with increased incidence of wildfires and the smoke from those fires ending up in vineyard areas. When that happens, the vines that are in those areas take up the smoke and compounds from the smoke. And when we make wine from it, we end up with wines that have these characteristic off aromas and flavors associated with smoke. And I'll say right up front, these are not the sort of pleasant aromas of smoke from a campfire or things like that. This is cigarette and cigar smoke. This is smoked meat or smoked fish, strong ashy characters. And then in some wines, they may smell okay, but there's an aftertaste that is more of an issue. So what you have in front of you now is an example of one of the wines that we made as part of our research program. So I would invite you over the next few minutes to smell those wines, smell the wine, and you can taste it. There are spit cups there you can use. Just to give you an appreciation of why this is such an issue for the industry. In the worst case example, wines are not saleable, or if they are saleable, it's at a lower cost or lower price for those wines. Some of these wines, it's the aftertaste, you get this lingering character that is potentially problematic. We can go to the next slide. So we run what I call a grape to glass research program focused on this issue. So we're focused on things like risk assessment, some basic, just what's happening with the vine and why does it respond the way it does and what is it doing. So part of this research is in the vineyards, and this is the work that we do at the Prosser Center. Some of it is at the Wine Science Center. So on the vineyard side, since 2016, we have run a series of smoke exposure trials where, in the picture on the upper left, we have portable hoop houses that we can cover 60 grapevines at a time. And then we apply smoke to some of the houses and not to others. So we have controls and smoke affected fruit. And we use this system to look at things like, does it matter what the fuel source is? So is there a role depending on the vegetation that's actually burning and creating the smoke? Do we get different outcomes depending on what's burning? Doesn't matter what time during the growing season. So it used to be that wildfire season was sort of late summer into fall. Over recent years, we've seen smoke exposures as early as May and June. So we're getting these exposures at different times in berry development. Does the vine respond? Do the berries respond in different ways depending on what the exposure is? So we're doing some basic research to understand vine response. We're also doing some practical research to support our industry. So one of the projects we've had over the last 3 or 4 years is with various grape materials. So are there things that we can apply to a vineyard? If we know a smoke exposure is imminent, can we go out and put some materials on the vineyard that might prevent uptake of these compounds or at least reduce the impact? And we have been successful in this trial to find some things that do work. One of the key things is at the end of the season, before you make wine from it, you actually have to remove those materials because they act as adsorbents, collect these compounds from the smoke. But if you leave them on and make wine from it, from that fruit, it just releases back to the wine. So it's kind of a two-step process. They have to put it on, but then they have to take it off again before the fruit can be used. And then just to highlight one of our most recent endeavors, we are starting in 2021, we've worked towards establishing a smoke sensor network in commercial vineyards around the Columbia Basin throughout the state. So this is there's a picture of it in the upper right here. It's a sensor station that includes a weather station, particle counters so we can measure smoke density, along with some gas sensors that measure things like carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, some of the things that are commonly found in smoke. And in addition to that, we'll be doing making some effort in the next 2 or 3 years to collect smoke during the composition of smoke. So those are sort of the efforts that we're doing on the vineyard side. We can go to the next slide. We'll talk about the things we're doing on the winemaking side. So one of the key things we do with our smoke exposures is to generate smoke-affected fruit that we can bring back to the Wine Science Center to make wine with. And that allows us to understand how winemaking practices, how the things we do in the winery to make the wine impact the outcome. Are there things that we can change in how we make wine to minimize the effect? I also have a graduate student now working on some mitigation effects, so testing some things we can do with reverse osmosis or with enzymatic treatment to degrade these compounds, either to remove them with reverse osmosis or to degrade the compounds using enzymes that have activities that would be useful. And then we're also always working on new tools for analyzing for these compounds in grape samples, in wine samples, in the smoke that we collect. And then it was kind of on hold during COVID, but we're now getting back into doing sensory evaluation of these wines so that we can really have grape to glass with what happens in the vineyard, how we manage that in the winery, and then look at the outcome using sensory evaluation of finished wines. So this project was primarily funded in the first couple of years by the Washington wine industry. But in more recent years, we've been able to garner support from USDA. And most recently, in October, we were awarded, me and colleagues at UC Davis and Oregon State, an SCRI grant through the USDA program for $7.6 million. And about $2.5 million of that comes to this year. So, one more slide, I think. In terms of what we're trying to do, part of it is just to understand what happens in wine. But we're really focused on giving the industry tools that will help them estimate risk, to understand when they have an exposure, what's the likelihood that it's going to have a significant impact on them, as well as tools to help them clean up these wines if they're not too severely affected. And I think one of the key things that comes out of particularly our sensor network is we're putting these sensors in commercial vineyards. And we think we can use that to supplement the existing air quality monitoring systems that the state has in place. But the key thing is these will be sites that are ag sites. Most of the monitors that are out there now are located in population centers. And so having these sensors in place in ag venues and vineyards and other winery sites will give growers, winery owners better information about when we have these kinds of events, should their workers be out working under the conditions that exist? If so, what protective equipment might be appropriate for the conditions on a particular day? I think that's it for my presentation. What did you think of wine?
Really tasted like smoke.
Yeah, it tasted like smoke.
I felt like I had smoked a cigarette.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the ashy cigarette smoke kind of character. This wine doesn't smell quite so bad, but you really get it in the taste. And this is one of the wines that we deliberately smoked at the Prosser Center. And the idea is we wanted to have a good, bad example to help people recognize this problem when they see it and understand what the potential impact is. We have time for questions?
Absolutely. Time for good wine.
That'll be
Do I
later.
need to
That'll be
run?
later today.
good to meet you in person. We've only met by email. Like ridiculous that the provost after 2 years has not met our fine faculty down here, but I'm really interested in this, especially because when I moved here 2 years ago, I knew a lot less about wine than I know now. And really fascinating in terms of the blending of science and tradition / culture. As an anthropologist, that really intrigues me. I know we had a little bit of email communication about this, but one of our alumni down at Clearwater Canyon is also doing some manipulation of what happens after the smoke tainted grapes come in. And I won't use the right nomenclature, but her and her husband are doing things like when it's in the vat, the sediment at the bottom, raking it so there's more oxidation surface, and that can help absorb some of that smoke taint without having to add things that take away from the things you want. Are those manipulations part of the research that you also have ongoing?
So we're not, I actually had an opportunity to talk with her at the recent wine meeting here in Kennewick. So I will be going up and meeting with her to talk more closely about what they're doing. I presented a couple of examples of things we're doing, but there's a range of approaches that we're looking at, including what are the kinds of materials that we could use to remove to adsorb. So there are fining agents that we could put into a tank that would help remove these. One of the issues generally with the approaches for cleaning up these wines is there's a lot of collateral damage to the positive aroma and flavor compounds that are present. So something that would help remove these things without causing collateral damage is the holy grail for this kind of research.
So the question comes from Regent Redmond. You're right here in the heart of wine country, Washington wine country. But are there things that kind of block your research or would help assist your research in the future?
There are. We have a terrific facility. We have great vineyards to work with. We struggle with recruiting and retaining students and postdocs and staff. The presence of PNNL is a double-edged sword. There are certainly plenty of opportunities for collaboration, but we also see some of the people that we're training, that we're working with as part of our team, go across the street to PNNL for better opportunities, better salary than what we can offer. The cost of living is higher here than it is in other parts of the system, and the opportunities across the street can create challenges for us. The other thing that is a concern for our graduate students is access to medical care. Making sure that they have the same access that students in Enrollment have has been problematic at times. Being able for them to access doctors here using the insurance they have has been challenging. And so if there are things we can do to help with that, it would be beneficial for our recruitment and especially retaining graduate students. Two things to talk about.
Other questions?
I just have a off the wall fun question for you.
Okay.
I was really inspired by the label in the back of the bottles. What's the story of the silhouette pictures of the classes on the wine bottles?
So it's not on these bottles. These are the research wines.
Yeah.
You're talking about the blended learning wines, which is blended learning is a program that's kind of a classroom internship opportunity for students in our program. Part of what they do is work with local wineries to make wines that we can sell under the blended learning program. And on the back of the labels for all of those, we have a silhouette of the students who were involved in that project. And it's just, it's a way to showcase the fact that these wines are student made, they come from this program. It's a way to publicize what we do. It's an opportunity. The students love it because those bottles go out in the world with their names and their silhouettes on the back. So I don't know who came up with it, but I think it's a brilliant opportunity for emphasizing what we do.
The name, it was a student like many years ago that came up with the name Blended learning.
Blended learning. I mean, it's a great program. It raises some funds for some of the things that we do. And it gives students a real sense of ownership in the program. This is something they produced while they were here.
Great, thank you. I have a question. I think Chancellor Hayes mentioned, there's a lot of attention around winemaking. You're in the heart of kind of where we are in Washington State. What are you seeing in terms of, I appreciate some of the barriers and challenges that you just mentioned. What are you seeing in terms of opportunities and enrollment? Is there interest in this program? I mean, I am a communicator with a team of communicators that all want to be a part of this program. So I don't think that will ever be a part of our company, but I mean, there's just so much energy and excitement around the idea of Washington wine. So what are you seeing in terms of enrollment?
So up through the onset of COVID issues, enrollment was growing continuously. The pandemic took a toll on enrollment, but I think we'll see it come back. There continues to be strong interest. Our students generally come out of here with jobs lined up, many of them in the industry here in Washington, but increasingly we see some of our students being recruited by wineries in California, New York. So the opportunities for growth, I think, are terrific. We're in a great location with all the wineries, the vineyards around here. Our students have great opportunities for internships, whether they're interested in the vineyard or on the winemaking side. There are plenty of opportunities for them to learn while they're here. It's part of the program. They have to do an internship, and the opportunities are definitely here. In terms of growth, I think as the industry grows here, as our program becomes increasingly recognized throughout the U.S., we are seeing our students being recruited by other states, by wineries and vineyards in other states.
I think a couple of things too, just for the Regents, is that the approval that you did for the B&E major is certainly going to help, because we're in the process right now of hiring the chair for that department, and that chair will be located in the Tri-Cities. And with that will also come the requirement that students complete their last 2 years, at least their last 2 years here in the Tri-Cities. So that's going to help a great deal. We've had a lot of students who have stayed in Enrollment and gotten horticulture majors or whatever, and they never get to see this beautiful facility or the great resources that we have here. I believe that's going to start 2023, fall 2023, looking at Kate.
I think it starts.
Oh, starting 2022? Okay, so that will start 2022, and I think that that's going to change things too. The other thing that I'd just like to mention is we are working on our continuing or corporate and continuing education programs. And our first course out the gate was wine tasting room credentials, so that the people who are serving the wine in those tasting rooms are professional, they know what they're talking about, and they can have great service. And that has been immensely popular with the wineries here locally. We've also gotten interest from the wineries on the west side, as we say, and also from California in that very short class, but very impactful class.
Well, and I think it all goes back to what has already been mentioned in terms of telling the story. And, every single presentation we've heard this morning is just fantastic. And, some are really have the ability to be transformational. This one feels like there's just a society right now focused on the idea of wine, and that we should be leveraging that in terms of how we amplify the message of what we're doing here in Tri-Cities and the partnership.
Oh, I completely agree. And I think, excuse me, one of the ties that I think is very important is these are becoming more and more important issues as we see climate change and we see more and more wildfires, et cetera.
It doesn't matter. Go ahead. Go ahead. Okay, I just want to follow up on what Lisa brought up, because there's been a very popular program in Walla Walla at the community college for many years. And how does that interaction work out with you all? Are they do you get a lot of transfer students from there? And
We do receive a lot of transfer students from Walla Walla, from Yakima Valley Community College as well. And then South Puget Sound, South Seattle, Puget Sound. We receive students from there as well. We have articulation agreements with all of those, I believe. With the community colleges.
Kate serves on the education part of the wine commission. Yes.
Yeah, the wine education.
Right.
So articulation agreements with Walla Walla, YBCC, those are all in place.
Yeah.
I happen to keep my eye on a lot of sort of the new trends in beverages, and it seems to me that there's a whole lot of new stuff that's coming out of beverages. Some of it wine related, lower alcohol wine, but you've got kombucha, you've got obviously the craft brewing, you've got the whole non-alcoholic spirit craze. You've just got so many cannabis infused liquids, just et cetera, et cetera. How do you feel like we're positioned in the sort of the vanguard of what's next?
The wine industry amongst beverage industries has tended to be on the conservative side in terms of moving forward, but I think there has been a lot of interest and activity in some of the hop infused kinds of products, things like that. I think the industry certainly is looking at those opportunities and looking at those challenges as well. So recognizing that there's a lot of change in there and that represents a challenge to us. But I think the industry is aware of that, and they are working on products, doing things like going away from traditional glass bottle, heavyweight bottle packaging to aluminum cans, Tetra Paks, some of the other, just other styles of packaging which might be lower in packaging. So the industry is making strides and trying to shake that conservative nature that they've been in.
So I guess my question is a little different because there's obviously the wine industry and then there's WSU. And so the wine industry is the wine industry, but for WSU, how are we positioned to look at the broader scope of what people want in a beverage that is not, milk or juice, sort of like what is that sort of that adult beverage category, and whether it's, hard alcohol and all of the bespoke distilleries and the surge in beer, just all of those pieces. Are we participating in that, or are we kind of in the wine lane? And that's really our area of expertise. There's no wrong or right answer here. I'm just curious.
So we are participating, and there's a group in Pullman that's working on beer. We would love to do brewing here as well, and also there's a very large distilling industry in the Tri-Cities that we are waiting to purchase a still to kind of join in on that. We had a very tragic loss of one of our business faculty members who was sort of heading up the business of beverages writ large, so coffee, tea, wine, spirits, whatever it was. We lost him in December. But we are working now to hire somebody else to kind of pick up that mantle. So we think that there's a lot of potential here to do that. As you heard before, we would need the faculty and the resources to do some of that, but it's certainly doable. And I think that being the wine center and having the business school be the beverage management center is a great fit.
And I guess I would add to that in addition to what I've talked about here this morning, I do have an active research program in cider. So I work with some of my colleagues in the board, particularly over at the Mount Vernon Center, on things related to cider apple production, cider apple quality, how that impacts cider quality. So we have some projects going there. And then I also have an ongoing research program with distilled spirits, particularly understanding how the use of barrels for aging spirits affects the composition and some sensory evaluation. So most of my focus has been on smoking, but I do have active programs, insider.
Right, yeah, this seems like with the business, the hospitality, and then our great expertise in this one, very dominant area of beverages that are not, that are things adults like to drink, not necessarily intoxicating or not, but it just seems like we have a real opportunity to keep pushing envelope for where we want to be.
Oh, we definitely do. And I would say, one of the things that's little known about the Mid-Columbia region is that we're the hops capital of the world. Truly, we supply most of the hops for beer. So we have that. I know that Colleen's been working on barley in the further east of us. I don't know if you want to say something.
I would say that there has been a strong effort led by WSU and WSTA. Sandra has been part of that leadership team around the liquid arts supply chain excellence in liquid arts. So we already have wine. There's work with cider, but looking at craft beer and distilled spirits. That is just reconvening right now. WSDA reached out to us after we've gotten through the pandemic, and there will be a meeting at the end of the month. In fact, Sandra will get the information today. It's literally just reconvening. So they're interested in determining different types of investments and exploring how the state can better support the industry at large.
Great.
Anything else? Okay, last but not least, we have Dr. Robert Bauman, and he is a professor of history. So he's going to bring in the humanities side of all this and kind of bring us home.
Morning. It's great to be here today and talk about some of my research. As Chancellor Haynes said, you've heard about some of the tremendous research being done here with culture and knowledge, the sciences. And so I'm going to talk briefly today about some of the, what I think is anyway, really exciting work research that I've been involved in and social sciences, very much grounded in the Tri-Cities, about the Tri-Cities, its history and its past. I'll say I really got started in this line of research. I was working on book on the war on poverty, Los Angeles, and I started teaching here. And one of the first classes I taught here was on the civil rights movement. And so as I was teaching the course, I had students come up to me and say, "Have you heard anything about, anything about things that happened here?" I see, it's like, I don't know anything. Let me look into that. I spent the last 20 years looking into that. So it was really questions from students that got me engaged in this line of research. And so as I got involved in the research, initially my focus was on the history of African Americans in the area. And that history really beginning in many ways with World War II with the Hanford Project. My research looks at the people who developed the story of the science and engineering Hanford been told many times. So around 15,000 African Americans migrated to this region to work at Hanford. The original contractor of the Hanford site was DuPont Company, and they actively recruited workers from the South because the wages in the South were much lower. When we interviewed people who came here to work, they talked about the thing that drew them, were the wages, making 3 to 4 times the amount of money working here at Hanford than they were making in the South. And so initially looking at what were their experiences here, what did they find? And it's starting initially with African Americans and then expanding out to look at other non-white groups in the area. So as I said, our work highlights people who helped build Hanford, literally, right? Construction, run reactors, clean up the area. We've received funding over the years from DOE, Mission Support Alliance. We received a really important grant from the National Park Service, the oral histories of African Americans who come to work here. Hanford History Project. Most recently, just in the last couple of months, we received a grant from Humanities Washington to expand our oral histories and oral histories of the Latinx population here in the Tri-Cities. Really, really exciting project. Looking forward to diving into that. And so, as I said, our work is about the people who have come to work in the fields of energy, trade, and environment. Sure. So this is the most recent work, and I see they've been handed out, which is wonderful. And I want to shout out to my colleague and co-editor, Robert Franklin, who's the assistant director of the Campus History Project. We work very closely together. This work that just came out. The timing wasn't great. December of 2020, in the midst of the pandemic, isn't the best time to have a book release. Can't have a book release party, but I think a really important work. And so this book looks at the broader racial history of the Tri-Cities, starting with indigenous peoples in the area, Wanapum and others, and then looking at the experiences of African Americans, not just during World War II, but in the early years of the Cold War, during the Civil Rights era, and looking at Chinese and Japanese immigrants to the region who came to work in the railroads, in the fields. One story that many people don't really know, I don't think, is when Japanese Americans were interned, incarcerated during World War II, there was a line drawn down the coast, right? We were on the west side of that line. We were sent to internment camp. We were incarcerated. We were on the east side of that line. Not. For the most part, the line goes fairly straight down the coast, but in our area, there's a bubble. Look at the map, there's a bulge. The bulge is the Columbia River. And so some bureaucrat, I assume somewhere in Washington, D.C. drew this line and said, let's just use the river as the boundary. What that meant here was that if you were of Japanese descent living in Benton County, you were on the wrong side of that line. You were sent to an internment camp. You were incarcerated. If you were in Franklin County, you were on the safe side, I guess, of that line. And generally, you were not sent to it. There were some exceptions. One of the chapters in this book talked about the Yamauchi family. I've been here for 40 years already by that point, established a number of businesses. Family members were grown, living in different parts, some in Franklin County, some in Benton County. So family members in Benton County were interned, either Hopkins, Wyoming, or Minnesota, Idaho. For the most part, those in Franklin County were not. So that's just one of the stories that I tell. It's a really, really important story about the history of the region. It also reflects, right, the history of the United States and the history of the American West. So I'm just going to share a few images, a couple of images with you. So when African Americans arrived here to work at Hanford, they found much better wages, but they found segregation. All aspects of work at Hanford were segregated. The housing was completely segregated, the dormitories, Hanford. The dining halls were segregated. So this is a photo. There were stores on site, right? But there were stores that were for whites and stores for African Americans. So see in this photo, all the people in this photo are African American other than the security guard. So virtually all aspects of life at Hanford were segregated. And the Tri-Cities was segregated. The housing was segregated. If you were Black, you could not live in Kennewick. Kennewick had racially restricted covenants and prided itself on being lily white. The city of Richland, as a federal government town, said that only permanent employees of the Hanford site could live in Richland, and African Americans were prohibited from being permanent employees at Hanford, temporary employees, so they could not live in Richland. So the only options, if you were Black, was to live in one of the segregated dormitories or live in East Pasco, was the only place in the Tri-Cities around America. That continued well after the war. There's going to be another wave of workers coming as Cold War production ramps up. And so those trends, that story of segregation will continue well into the 1950s and 1960s. If you visit Pasco during this period, you would often see signs on restaurants, taverns, shops that would say we cater to white trade only. It was similar to signs you would see in the South, right? But they were here in the Tri-Cities. This image is probably as stark an image I can show you that reflects that. This is the entertainment calendar for Hanford, December 1944. So this was a really isolated place in the 1940s. And so Hanford would bring in entertainment, things to do to try and keep workers here. A lot of workers would stay for a month or two. The winds would blow, the dust would blow, they're called termination winds, and people would leave, right? And so they did what they could to keep people here, so bringing entertainment, but the entertainment was completely segregated. You can see every day, white colors, like. And that's true during this period. So those are some of the things that African Americans faced in the place. This is an image of a civil rights protest in downtown Kennewick in 1963. This march was taking place at essentially the same time that African Americans were marching in Birmingham. Everyone knows about that march, right? Very few people know about this march. And the march was happening because 1963 kind of was still completely segregated. If you were Black, you could not live anywhere. In fact, civil rights leaders called Kennewick Birmingham, Washington. But the complete segregation that was happening. So the other thing that we uncovered and write about are efforts that African Americans and other non-whites in the street Tri-Cities did to challenge these things, right? The activism, the efforts made, whether individually or groups, to challenge segregation, challenge some of the discrimination. That was part of the history here in the Tri-Cities. And so the other thing they did was build community, right? Build churches, community organizations, NAACP chapters, things like that, to help challenge some of the difficulties that they faced. And there are a lot of individual successes. One of the great stories of young boy James Wong Howe, his father came to work on the railroads in the 1880s. Pasco. James Wong Howe was raised here in Pasco, and he went on to become an award-winning cinematographer. He went to Academy Awards for cinematography. We have Art Fletcher, who was the first African-American to be on the Pasco City Council, served in 4 presidential administrations, and headed the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights and United Negro College Fund. The Yamauchi family that we talk about in our book has had a number of businesses, a number of really significant individuals here locally and regionally. And more recently, Saul Martinez, several years ago, was elected the first Latino mayor of the city of Pasco. And very recently, Blanche Barajas, the first Latina mayor of the city of Pasco. So the work that I've been involved in and worked with my colleagues has documented the challenges and that non-whites face in segregation and discrimination. And some of those patterns of residential segregation especially continue. But it also highlights some of the significant contributions in terms of labor, culture, economic contributions, and the successes of those populations. Tri-Cities is and has been for a while the fastest growing area, right, region in terms of population in the state of Washington. We are the most diverse campus in the WSU system. And I think research that I've been involved in and worked on with my colleagues help reflect that and highlight some of that. So, if any questions you might have.
Can you talk a little bit more about the Humanities grant and the Latinx communities?
Yes, so we just got that a couple of months ago. We're working with Tri-Cities Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Martin Valdez, LULAC, talked to some of our student leaders on campus. We'd like to involve students in that. It's a really community-based oral history project. So this is a small grant, so we see this as it's kind of a starting point. Hope to build on that and maybe look for trying to get larger funding to make this a really significant based.
Yeah. So what's the reaction generally been as you maybe publicize this more and talk about it more within the community? I've watched similar research in other university communities and places I've lived where it tends to be almost a bifurcated reaction. One is, well, let me tell you how it really was. That's really not quite how, it's like, let's go back and try and explain it away. another reaction, I'm purposely making them really black and white, is the other one would be, okay, we've had this past, how do we really make sure that that's not our future? And, so I'm kind of curious as to what reactions have been from different groups. And within the Tri-Cities, I could see Kennewick may look upon this a little different than Pasco would, but, I am just curious what you've heard and what you felt as you talked about this.
So both of those things that you talked about, I've gotten and everywhere in between.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I started this research 20 years ago. I've given talks, Kiwanis, Rotary clubs in the area, I've given talks at high schools here. We've had a series here during COVID on Zoom, where I've given talks as part of the town. A lot of the response I get is surprise. People say this about a lot of things, right? But people really don't know their history. And we have a lot of people in the Tri-Cities who have not been here for more than 10 or 20 years, because it's a dynamic growing region. And so don't really know that past. And so I get a lot of that surprise. Oh, I didn't know that, and actually a lot of thank yous for telling these stories. I do have had some reactions of people who say, this really that important to talk about, those sorts of reactions, who some folks who would rather that we not talk about race. But I think especially, I always think these stories are really relevant, but I think especially in the last few years, some things have happened nationally. There's been more eagerness to learn this story. So especially in the last few years, I've had very, very positive responses from people in the community. And as you might imagine, my students have heard these stories, right? And they very eager to learn that as well.
Have you had what feedback have you had from people of color?
Yeah, so we've worked really closely with, so for instance, Access, which is the African American Community Cultural and Educational Society. In fact, they had done some oral histories in the past, and Cantor History Project worked really closely with them. So we digitized those for them. And so they're sort of part of this really large oral history collection. So they've been very excited about this work and telling these stories sort of more broadly. Because I think outside the Black community, they really weren't well known. And so we work really closely with different organizations, and the response generally is very positive. We've had, occasionally someone say, this isn't quite right, when we give in talks, and so we corrected some things, but generally very positive.
Yeah. Mayor of Seattle's father was Black, his mother was Japanese, which was an outcome of segregated patterns established. And he has passions about this issue, never wanting it to be visited on anybody ever again, because his mother and father were explaining what it was like to be father being African American, his mother being Asian, what it did to them in terms of jobs, housing opportunities, and so I'm gonna give him your book. And the other is there's a library called the Beacon Hill Library in Seattle. My son's a librarian there, and they have actually been dealing with this issue. Beacon Hill was very diverse, but it was also very segregated for a really long time. It used to be the Blacks were in the valley, the Asians were on Beacon Hill. I mean, it was, when I moved into Mount Baker, people said, whoa, hold a second, you're moving into the wrong neighborhood. And I said, my money is as good as anybody else's money. But it was really ugly for a while until people kind of said, time out, you're taking a race that issues that had been sitting around since World War II, and you're bubbling them up into, so your book is not old. There are a lot of people still trying to work through this, city planners in particular. But I'm going to give your book to Bruce Harold, and I'm going to get another one and give it to my son's library and say, you need to have this discussion in Seattle because people say that Seattle's not a tinderbox. That's because they don't live in Seattle. So in my generation, we've gotten used to it. Our head is bloody but unbowed. But the young people, whoa, they're tired of it. So I like what you've written here, and I'm just going to try to figure out a way to have you go over and talk to some people about what happened in the past so that people realize that there is a way to overcome it. Seattle's really, when I was at HUD, we didn't give Seattle any money. You're in the north end, you were in the white neighborhoods. You're in the south end, you're in the black neighborhoods. That is still there. And President Biden has not moved away from that policy. He simply says, if you wish to remain segregated, it's a violation of the law, and we cannot give you money if you're segregated. As a Vice President Biden. So your book is really, really timely. I'm glad to see this. I didn't mean to give a speech. I'm just talking.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah. I imagine you're probably familiar with Quintard Taylor, who's worked on Seattle.
Yeah.
He's been a mentor of mine, someone whose work I've looked up to and used to help. I've had conversations.
He knows how to get a hold of it. Just tell him so we can plot. Not blame it on him.
Yeah, but at any rate, the history of Seattle is really significant, right? Race as well, and what gets in some of that.
We can ask it Tacoma, which is the worst. I mean, there's so many places, but this is a nice bridge for people to read and think through. So
I hope so. Thank you. Yeah. Anyone else have a point?
I just want to applaud your work here. I think telling the stories are so critically important. And so I really appreciate your curiosity around this and then the research. To build on what Regent Sims was saying, from the area that I'm from in Vancouver, before Katrina, we had a Vanport that was flooded and a significant amount of our African-American population that was wiped out. And we don't tell that story in Oregon. We don't tell that story in Southwest Washington. And it's just critically important that this research continues and that we are telling the stories of how changes in our demographics and with new census data that's out that's showing significant trends that are changing in our Black and Indigenous and communities of color. I think it's just really, really important. So I just want to first say thank you for doing this. My question is, are you seeing that there is synergy or collaboration with other faculty and other campuses that are doing some of this work? Because what you're doing, I would love to see other places, and it probably already exists. I don't know if you're maybe someone to speak to that, but this is such a great model for the way in which we need to tell stories about our history and the research and helping students to really understand that as well.
Yeah, thank you for the comments and the question. I have worked with, there was a graduate student, a master's student at Vancouver campus who did some work on Vancouver, and I was on her committee. And so we definitely had conversations about some of the similarities, differences in some of the work we were doing. The collaborations I've had have so far been more with community groups here and making sure to establish those and work closely with those groups, less so across campuses, although my history department has been very supportive of my work and the work we've done here of the Campus History Project and research and stories we've been telling. But it's mostly been myself and my colleague Robert Franklin at the Campus History Project. And we have had a couple of grad students over the years. I would love to have more to be able to expand some of that work. I would love to at some point have someone here who is an expert in Chicano history, Latin American history, Latinx history. I think that would be such a great position on this campus with the student population and the community population. But saying that, we been able to work really well with the community groups and organizations. So.
This is incredibly rigorous work. I mean, footnotes, the bibliography, the index. Holy cow. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. It was not, again, not all me, my colleague Robert Franklin. And we had one of my graduate students who helped work on some of the oral histories, has a chapter in there. It is about 20 years of my while working on some other things. But we did, I really have to highlight the oral histories. I have been doing a lot of the primary research and documents, historical societies here, museums, going to Olympia state documents and those sorts of things. But the oral histories help provide so much more stories, flesh out the stories, fill in gaps. And so having that history project and the National Park Service grant, which really helped do a lot of those oral histories, was really crucial. So thank you.
Just quickly, do you know Erasmo Gamboa?
I know who he is. Yes, I did use his work. I don't know him.
He's a Husky, but
yes.
But the thing is that he's a historian from a statewide perspective. I would encourage you to maybe connect with him. He also helped CMAR, which is a community health clinic, but also is kind of statewide in their healthcare stuff. Create a museum that is in South Seattle. That it's basically a Mexican American museum, and you might want to connect with him to look at what they've done there. But also just, I mean, I know that he's done the state as far as looking at the history.
Yes. Yes, his work has been tremendous.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. So thank you.
Sure. I can actually connect you. Like, or
Awesome. All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you. That's what we have for you today. We started out by saying that some of this research, or a lot of this research, is one of the best kept secrets in the WSU system. And we definitely hope to change that. I hope you've seen that we are very relevant to our region, and the region then expands, because as we're looking at energy, environment, and agriculture, that the research that we're doing here can expand out greatly. And there is that thread that runs through a lot of our research here at the Tri-Cities. And that was purposely done, as was said, because we have a smaller faculty, hopefully wanting to grow that. You heard that from a couple of people, but a smaller faculty means we have to kind of rally around certain topics so that people have compatriots, partners in their work. But I hope what you've seen too is that we have a great faculty. We have a wonderful research ability here, and people who are very dedicated to what they're doing. And we just see it growing and growing and growing. So
thank you. Thank you all.
What a great morning.
Super
Chair.
impressive. Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say super impressive. And I can't wait to tell people that I know about all the great work that is going on here. And so look forward to more research and more great stories. So thank you all very much. Really appreciate it.
Yes. Before we close this part of the agenda down, I just want to compliment Sandra and her team, because what Sandra's brought is focus. And before we had lots of great work going on at the Tri-Cities, but the strategic plan, you noticed the little graphic she showed on some stuff. There's a clear messaging now around what it is that they're trying to do and want to build in the Tri-Cities. And before Sandra got here, it was just a little more diffuse. And so I think focus is so important to being able to build in the future, because now what it is we need to do, what our resources need to be, what those limitations are. And that strategic plan, and us just instigating a planning culture within the whole institution at each campus and system level, this means that when we have a You say, Sandra, here's $100,000. She can tell you today exactly where they would use it. There's $1 million. This is exactly where we would use it. And it's got strategic focus to it. So just compliments to Sandra and her administrative team who's all here, but it shows. So,
Well, thank you for that. One of the things I will just add one more plug in that, I'm a firm believer in we have to be stewards of place. And so one of the things I looked for when I came is what are the major economic drivers in the Tri-Cities? You don't have to look far to see what those three are. The energy, environment, and agriculture are huge economic drivers here. And we have people who are doing amazing things in each of those areas and things that can carry on into the future. I think we're making that mission. So thank you again. Really appreciate your time, and I'm sorry about the wine.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to our next presentation, which will be a legislative update. Vice President of External Affairs and Chief Legislative Officer Colleen Kirk.
Everyone. Forgive me. So the budget only came out yesterday, so I'm going to largely read from my computer, which is not the best. Way to present. There's so much new information. So what I'll do is probably take a break in some different sections to ask, so you can ask any questions. But please, if you have any questions as we go along, let me know. So today is actually the final day of the legislative session. So they haven't adjourned yet. They haven't signed the budget bill. It is on the bar, so they're following normal order. So we have a really good idea of what the state is going to be spending money on after this supplemental session. I think that's probably one of the most important things to acknowledge right now is it's a supplemental session. There's been a lot of activity, a lot of investments for a supplemental, and that gives us a good idea of what we'll be looking forward to for the biennial next year. So just to provide a little perspective, the operating budget grew from last year, $59.1 billion. It is now $63.8 billion at the end of the biennium. It's even more significant when you understand that $3 billion from the operating was directed to other budgets. What that means is that the actual state operating budget was right around $67 billion. So the other dollars that were directed go to one-time funding for the transportation budget, the capital budget, and then some one-time funding for paid family leave insurance. So that's kind of a broad overview of how the state is allocating dollars from operating. One thing I would say is when I worked for the legislature just about a dozen years ago, the state budget was about half. So it's pretty extraordinary growth when you look about it in those terms, but it was about half the size that it is now. So the legislature did provide significant investments for both 2- and 4-year higher education. I'm going to talk about it generally with respect to the sector, and then we'll talk about WSU. So there were some changes with respect to the Washington College Grant. We've talked about this over the years, but the Washington College Grant is the most generous student financial aid program in the country, and it is only becoming better for students in the state of Washington. So there's a $500 bridge grant for all students who receive the maximum amount of the grant, and then it raises the threshold for the maximum to 60% of the median family income. So this is a really good thing. We'll offer more access for students. We care about it a lot because of thinking about enrollment. The other one is that dollars were allocated, almost $3.5 million were allocated for a FAFSA advertising campaign. This is something that we care a lot about for all of our campuses. The sector really cares about. There is a lot of information. If you look at the different barriers to enrollment, FAFSA completion is one of them. And so this is an opportunity for the state to actually pilot whether that works and then tweak it as we head into the biennial. There are also just miscellaneous money for Career Connect Washington for Innovation Challenge grants. The biggest investment in this space is $150 million. So we created another loan program. So it is a very low interest student loan program. They did a one-time allocation of $150 million to set up a new fund. But in total, that was a pretty large investment going toward access to higher education in the state of Washington, in particular to support student finding the path to enrollment. So that's the background for WSU. Do you have any questions right now? No? All right, let me keep going. I should apologize to Regent Scheller because we had none of this information when we had the call. And so it's all novel. We only get this information yesterday. So for compensation, the legislature is providing WSU $7.5 million to support compensation enhancements. So what that looks like is 1.7% compensation increase for faculty and non-represented staff, and a 3.25% increase for classified employees. So we have talked at the previous meeting and at many previous meetings about the formula that the legislature uses to fund compensation. And it's a formula that doesn't work right now. So we are committed to a multi-biennial strategy with the legislature and with OFM, with the governor's office, to address this. And they did make a significant change. So right now, last year, before this session, it was 53% new appropriation and then 47% tuition. And that's actually shifted to 65% is new appropriation, reducing it down to 35% for tuition. So they're making a commitment toward change, and we will continue to work on this. I also want to identify it's a supplemental. This is a very significant change for a supplemental budget year. We've never brought forward compensation in a supplemental budget year.
Colleen, sorry.
Please.
Before you move on, I just don't want anybody going back and going, well, the raise that everybody's going to get is 1.8% or whatever. We'll work with tuition. Stacy and myself and others will work together on what that looks like. We are committed to raising faculty and staff salaries by more than what we get from the state. So I just don't want that going out there as well. Here's what the number is. We wanted to get the most we can get from the state and start correcting the formula. And Colleen and her team were really successful in moving us down that road. So we would love all of it right away, but I think this is a better step than we thought we were going to be in, perhaps even 2 months ago. So I just want to provide some perspective on that, as we'll work with you all as the board on what eventually that will be for our faculty and staff.
Yes.
Right, and Kirk and Elizabeth have been very clear about this with faculty leadership from the very beginning, so.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. In Turnbull, it has been a good learning experience. I know for Vice President Pearson and I, as we've been doing a lot of conversing internally around the state budget and understanding how many of us internally thought that what the state does translates directly to what we do internally. And it is not a direct translation. There's a lot of work that happens at the leadership level with respect to what the state does. I want to reiterate, though, what President Schultz says in terms of working on compensation. We have really strong support from the governor with his budget, with both budgets from the House and the Senate. We were really surprised by that. We did not anticipate that all three budgets would be so strong. We are going to have a multi-biennium strategy around this. And one thing that President Schultz and I have talked about is really working with our colleagues at the Council of Presidents so that we can advance us at least as a four-year sector, although it's an issue across 2- and 4-year sector. Yes.
Sort of related thing on compensation. There's been a lot of controversy. There's been a lot of controversy in the state for this new long-term care requirement, and and that's going to offset increases. I guess they expanded it. I think it's supposed to start in July now.
They extended it, yeah.
Yeah.
They have made
But I don't know what, I can't remember because I'm not affected by it, but what the percentage was. But that's got to offset all of this as well.
I believe that it's a fairly small, I don't have that information right now. I can get it. I believe it's a fairly small percentage, or even a point below a percentage in dollar amount that would be removed, but they're also looking at modifications. They have been tweaking it, and I believe they will continue to do so. That was an excellent question.
0.055%.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
No, is Stacy here?
Yes, Stacy.
Or Teresa?
Well, Teresa's who we would really need. Yeah.
Yeah, anyway, and so I just want to make that, even if the state does that, the increase we would do in compensation would be much more significant than that. So, but you're right, it all of a sudden 3% doesn't look like 3% anymore if we're tacking something on. So that is an issue that we'll just continue to work with the state on.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to participate in the
Regents and Trustees
Olympia Day, and my piece was on the compensation with the Republican leadership. And there was some good questions that they had, and Chris Mealy did an awesome job. But I just wanted to call out and say and name one of the notes that I had written was, we have not seen compensation increases through the legislature since, is this accurate, 2013?
Yeah.
So this is a really
Very
big deal.
issue. Yeah. So I think this, President Schultz can speak to this. I think this ended up being one of the #1 things that he talked about in legislative meetings. I think that, again, one of the things that Vice President Pearson and I have learned is a complicated issue. We've had a hard time internally understanding it and translating that to legislative leaders who, if you think about $67 billion, have a whole lot of policy and formulas on their plate. And so that is, we've been thinking through how we can make that understandable, and really strong commitment from legislative leaders and from OFM. And now we need to work with more members and more stakeholders so that we can understand that. I learned a lot myself. I've been working on this for 10 years, and I learned a lot myself over the past legislative session. I'll keep moving on. So cybersecurity. So we were partly funded for cybersecurity. We were funded for the portion that is engineering related, and it will deliver programs at the Pullman campus, the Tri-Cities campus, and the Everett campus. We had really strong support. We were not funded in the House budget in the end. I really want to thank here the Washington Technology Industry Association and Microsoft in particular, who really went above and beyond in their advocacy for us. We also had strong support from Amazon. We would have had this except for the very large investments. It's about $336 million that were made to higher ed. We were not the whole only higher education institution who took what we could call a haircut. Our colleagues in the 4-year sector did, as well as the 2-year sector. This is something that we can examine institutionally to determine whether we want to bring it back in the biennial, which is something that we would normally do with a biennial request. This one was extraordinary, coming up in the supplemental anyway, both for the size and scope, but also it was a governor request. So part of the process that we will do will be to consider that. Are there any questions on that one? Psychiatric pharmacy residency, this was fully funded. We're very excited about it. We will have the pharmacy residents will be in a clinical setting in Eastern Washington in 2023. This was done in collaboration with the University of Washington. It will place their residents at the new mental health teaching hospital, which will be in North Seattle. There is a whole collection of what Chris Mulick and Kelly Westoff refer to as cats and dogs. And I want to just run through a couple of them. One is there's significant funding for the Washington State Academy of Sciences. Our faculty member, Dr. John Roll, is the chair of that entity right now. It's really a big win for WSU. We administer the Washington State Academy of Sciences, and it's something that's very important to us, particularly as we think about faculty winning national awards and positioning them in a scientific space. We're very excited about that on behalf of the Washington State Academy of Sciences. We also have a whole host of smaller assignments. The Stormwater Center in Puyallup received money, and we have also been tasked with some work on catalytic converter theft policy and homelessness. Both of those are worth mentioning because they are already being reported in various media outlets. So that will be exciting for us to continue to work with legislature on that. Capital budget. There's $2 million for compact shelving in the Holland Library. So that's on the Pullman campus. It will allow us to consolidate some of our library collections and to reclaim space in the central core. Once we do that, this is space that can be repurposed for our student study space. One of the things that Chancellor Chilton has talked about, Provost Chilton, but in this instance, Chancellor Chilton has talked about is how we can grow student study space and space for student excellence. And so this would be one way to get there. So we were pretty excited about this $2 million in the capital. Again, it's a supplemental. These are kind of extraordinary, an extraordinary amount of work from the legislature in a supplemental year. I want to talk about a little bit of policy because there are some that impacted us. There was anti-hazing legislation that passed. That's something that we worked extremely closely on with Student Affairs and WSU Student Affairs. Vice President, Vice Chancellor Ellen Taylor have been very closely involved in. The biggest piece is that it requires training for all new students during student orientation and as well to employees. It requires social fraternity and sorority organizations to formally notify universities of their intentions to operate on campus. So it's both a combination of notice and training. It's a very big deal at Washington State University and for some of our other schools. The other one that's a really big deal is there's legislation that we supported and helped develop that directs the College of Nursing to provide training to nurses seeking to be certified as sexual assault nurse examiners. This is a very big deal. I think it's come before the Regents in passing sometime over the past several years. We have a huge issue, a huge equity access to healthcare issue with respect to this in the state. So the legislature is moving forward and providing equity between the training opportunities for these nurses between Eastern Washington and Western Washington. We're very excited about it. Our College of Nursing, our College of Nursing has been a leader on this for multiple years. Let me talk about the faculty, excuse me, faculty regent has finally been approved. I can't remember how many years we've been working on this. We have been working on this.
Didn't that go back to Nick Leverage when he was first?
Yes, it's been a
Yeah.
long time. So it has finally passed the legislature. So under the bill, the faculty senate would nominate 3 candidates to the governor, who the governor will make the appointment, very similarly to how the governor makes the student regent appointment. The faculty regent cannot vote on matters pertaining to hiring, discipline, or tenure of specific faculty members. I know that our faculty senate chair, Dr. Paul, has already been working with Danielle Huss and with Des Jacobson on how we will implement this at WSU. But it was a very big deal, very excited about it. So congratulations. The last one with respect to policy is name, image, likeness. I know that we were following this and been working really closely. Our Cougar Athletics Director Chun, working with his counterpart at the University of Washington, no legislation passed this year. It was an up and down process over the course of the legislative session, and the 3 schools in the state of Washington that are most vested in this are WSU, UW, and Gonzaga. And so I would imagine that as this space grows and changes and we learn more about what's happening, I would imagine that the legislature may get active in this space. But for now, we are Washington in the Wild West, and so we'll see what happens.
Colleen, are we not one of the only states that doesn't actually have policy around NIL, or what is that? How does that look like across the
No,
country?
there are many states who don't. There are some states who do. And so it's just a matter of, I have no doubt that our policymakers and our institutions, so Director Chun, Vice President, Vice Chancellor Ellen Taylor, we're all going to be looking at this, working with our colleagues around the country, President Schultz working with the other Power 5 conferences to see what they're doing. This is going to be something that we will continue to revisit.
It's interesting, you know, President Schultz and I were at a conference in Florida where this was one of the main topics.
Yeah.
And state policy was encouraging your states, your individual states to really get active in this. It was very much on the table. And then the other piece that I had a question about is would it be state policy that you cap or could cap what an athlete might be able to make through their NIL, or is that something more that comes out of on a national scale?
So I would imagine that states could. That has not been the topic of the conversation in the state of Washington. It has really been about the opportunity and the ability for universities to do essentially matchmaking skills and provide guidance to students. We still don't know if Congress will do anything. I mean, this has been among the issues that we work on. You know, there are a few. Agriculture, there are a few that we are working state and federal like this, and this is one of the ones that we are working on really closely between state and federal. We will talk about this again without question. I don't have a doubt about it. I'll talk about 2 last policy things that are interesting. So one, speaking of things that are on the horizon, Oregon has passed legalization of psilocybin. There was a bill in our state legislature to pass the legalization of psilocybin. It did not pass, but the Healthcare Authority, they were actually designated to have a study. We have excellence in this area. Dr. John Roll is nationally well respected in this space. So we've already been working with the HCA on this, and I don't doubt that this will be something that we continue to work on at Washington State University. I would imagine that we will see this bill come back before the legislature and the biennial budget, and so we will certainly have more to talk about in this space. The other bill that we ended up following very closely was Senate Bill 5910. It establishes a statewide Office of Renewable Fuels at the Department of Commerce. And it also allocates $2 million for essentially for a down payment, as the state and a consortium would make a proposal for the federal infrastructure hubs. So in the infrastructure bill, the federal government has allocated $8 billion for renewable energy hubs around the country. There will be a minimum of 4, probably up to 8, but it's really a minimum of 4. And the state of Washington will undoubtedly be organizing around that. And so that's something WSU has a vested interest in. And then the state has allocated just over $3 million total to support this. The $1 million is ongoing, the $2 million is one time. So the last thing I'll say is, just to give you a sense of where else the legislature allocated dollars, almost $800 million for K-12, which is really around enrollment stabilization and inflation rebasing. I will say enrollment is something that all aspects of public education in the state of Washington are following pretty closely. There was almost $600 million for long-term care and developmental disabilities, $513 million for natural resource programs, including significant dollars for wildfire and for salmon restoration, $307 million for housing and homelessness programs. And then for comparison, higher ed, again, we received about $336 million total as a sector. So it gives a scope of where the state policy priorities are. Here's the last thing I'll say. We're already looking to the biennial. This is the most information I could ever imagine having talked about for a supplemental. So we're already looking to the biennial, just looking at the size of the budget, the amount of policy. We know that it's going to be a very busy year. For this year, $5.6 billion of this budget is one time, which means that there's going to be a lot of space for a lot of new things in the biennial. So it'll give us a lot to talk about and to work on. So with that, I would love to take any questions, any additional questions.
The governor spoke at my mentor's ceremony. We had Senator Fleming passed away, and he was my mentor. And the celebration of his life was done at UW because he was a Husky football player. And the governor came. It was, and we were all warned, do not lobby on anything. We were at the top of the Husky Stadium, and where the rich people get to watch the game. And but it was really interesting. One, nobody ever said thank you for funding higher ed, but everybody thanked him for funding everything from K through 12 through the university, so that nobody could accuse me of saying anything about WSU or the people from UW saying anything about UW. I've never seen him this upbeat. And I think that the education track he took, people thought that was easy, but I know from the other stuff I have to do at Olympia that was not easy for him. So one day, I don't know when we can, it would just be nice to tell, but you can't, you got to be really careful. I don't know how you do it, but this was a tougher budget than people think. And he just basically said, it's going to be K through universities, period. Yeah. And everybody else is kind of having to, scramble a little bit. But I don't know how you thank him, because you can't thank him. But there's got to be a way to say thank you, because it was a gutsy decision that he made at Senator Fleming's reception. Yeah. Maybe if you were not like me or Amari or other people, there was thanks all the time for education budgets. But those of us who were either regents or trustees from some of the other universities or worked for the universities, we just sat there in silence and smiled. But I think it'd be really good. I'm trying to figure out how you can do it without violating his ethics standards, because he wanted to say, I didn't do this in favor of anybody. I did this because this is my belief. And I don't know how you get to that. I'm just kind of asking how you want to do that, how you're going to do that. Or maybe you've done it already.
I'll ask President Schultz to go first.
I was going to say, Ron, is we thank everybody when we're done with a session, and we're profuse and both sides of the aisle, the governor, everybody. To me, you fight like hell during the session for what you want. At the end of it, you're over the top with thanking people for their and appreciating what they did. So we will be pretty direct. We do it in writing, verbally. I always start legislative visits thanking people for what they've done for us in the past. It's amazing how many people just don't do that. So trust us. If you have suggestions, let's talk tonight. I know we're running.
When I was exec, I'll go back to it. When I was exec, we had people say thank you. There were certain things that we did when I was exec that were really separate. Yep. And budgets for higher ed were set separate. So it's not kind of the usual. It is a way of kind of being gracious. I don't know how to describe it. I understand what you're gonna do. It's,
We'll talk further.
Yeah, I
We'll
think,
come up with
in all
something.
honesty, we can thank Governor Inslee right now, because I mean, I unequivocally thank Governor Inslee for, 10 years of leadership, consistent investment in higher education. We as institutions may have ups and downs in terms of the individual things that we want. If we look at the trajectory for the time that he has been governor, it's significant, sustained investment in higher education that is disproportionate to what you see in other states. So I feel very comfortable saying this, recognizing that we're on YouTube. But yeah, I really appreciate Governor Inslee's leadership. He has an outstanding cabinet. We work very closely with Director Sandison, Director Brown, Secretary Shaw. It's really just been a privilege, and COVID was an interesting experience for us because it allowed us to work much more closely with some of these state agencies in a different way, including with President Schultz. And I think that serves the institution as well. I think it's a great question.
Is it possible for us to sort of get a list of legislators who are really particularly helpful? So for example, in the Tri-Cities, when I see people, I'd love to be able to say, thank you so much for what you did for WSU. What I don't want to do is come across somebody and say, thank you for what you did for WSU. And they say, well, I didn't know.
No one will say that.
That happens to me too.
We will definitely. So we love it if Regents want to personally engage. Thank you for participating in Regents and Trustees Day. It really matters. It makes a difference. Yes, we can provide those lists. And we have personalized them for Regents previously, and we can do that again. But that reminds me, I need to thank Chris Mulick and Connor Haggerty and Alex Peach. We had a great session this year. So anything else?
I just want to thank you and your team. I mean, just impressive work. While the legislature was hard at work and there was more money than anyone anticipated, it takes that continual advocacy to get to the place where we have much to celebrate today. So thank you.
Very nice to see everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And next, we will turn it over to our esteemed Chair, Marty, for an election of officers.
Yeah, this is just an announcement that come our May 6th board meeting, we will have our slate of officers, and we will take a vote on that. So, John, I think we're heading to lunch now. I did want to just announce formally that once we return back from lunch, we will be doing concurrent committee sessions, and those sessions will all be individually being shared on YouTube. So just be aware that we will be able to continue to have people participate and watch the committee. So just know that that's happening.
Great. So we're going to take a break for lunch now, and we're going to resume at 1 o'clock. And the YouTube link, afternoon committee meetings, can be found on the WSU Board of Regents website.
And
CIC. We're going to the
lunch?
CIC for lunch.
Yeah, she and Joel's gonna walk over.